The holiday season is often seen as a time for joy, a moment when loved ones come together to celebrate. It's about the spirit of giving and sharing special moments with those who matter most. Yet for many, it's also synonymous with shopping, particularly on Black Friday. During this frenzied time, everyone is hunting for the best bargain, and if you've ever worked in retail, you know the chaos that ensues. Of course, you've likely heard about the stampedes in stores where people scramble and trample over one another just to snag a deal on something as ordinary as a TV. What you don't often hear, however, is a story about murder. Today's tale is one of greed, manipulation, and the darkness that can overshadow the holiday season, transforming what should be a time of joy into one of fear and tragedy. Today I'm going to be introducing you to Ashlea Ann Harris. She was born in Fort Worth, Texas on November 2, 1983. She was the youngest of three girls born to Monica Cassidy and Thomas Harris. Her sisters were Carrie and Melissa, and for most people, it might be hard to stand out in a family of three girls, but Ashlea never had any trouble right from the beginning. Her oldest sister, Melissa, knew there was something different about her. Melissa was 10 years old when Ashlea was born, so she remembers everything about her younger sister. She recalls how she used to pretend Ashlea was her baby when they were younger, creating a special bond between them. In her childhood years, Ashlea was described as being sort of a rough-and-tumble kind of kid. She paved her own path in life and didn't care much for painting her nails or playing with Barbie dolls. Unlike her sisters, she liked sports, music, and art. Despite not having too many shared interests, the trio still cared deeply for one another and spent a lot of time together. Ashlea also had a special bond with her mother Monica, and Ashlea would go to bingo all the time, just the two of them. It's where they really got to know each other and grow closer. They would spend hours playing the game, laughing, and creating lasting memories. At some point during her childhood, Ashlea's parents divorced, and her mother Monica remarried to a man named Chuck. It was tough with all the changes happening, but Ashlea and her sisters persevered and went on with their regular routines. The Harris family eventually found their way toward creating an even bigger, loving, blended family. Both Monica and Tommy remarried, bringing new partners into their lives and the lives of their children. Actually, over time, Ashlea developed a very close relationship with her stepdad, Chuck, and he became a very important figure in her life. She grew into a smart and kind teenager. Ashlea was described as the kind of person who loved everyone and had a natural zest for life. She had plenty of friends and even a few boyfriends in high school. She was one of those people that never had trouble making friends and meeting new people. She was never alone, constantly surrounding herself with people she cared about and that cared about her. Both her stepfather, Chuck, and her father, Thomas, were both law enforcement officers, and everyone thought that Ashlea would follow in their footsteps. She did express some interest, but at the end of the day, after graduating high school, she began working at Blockbuster Video in the meanwhile until she figured out what she wanted to do. It was there where she met a customer named Laura Love. Laura was a few years older than Ashlea, and over the course of the 8 months, the two of them got to know one another and became the best of friends. Now, Ashlea was the type of person who attracted both males and females, and she always considered herself straight in high school. She had boyfriends. However, everything changed when she met Laura. Their friendship blossomed into something more, and during this time, Ashlea began to question her own sexuality. She found herself drawn to Laura in a way that she had never experienced before. The more time they spent together, the stronger their connection became, and sooner or later, Ashlea couldn't deny the feelings that were developing towards Laura. So, after much contemplation and soul-searching, Ashlea came to the realization that she had fallen in love with Laura, and Laura shared those same feelings. It was a revelation that excited but also frightened Ashlea, because it meant challenging the identity that she had held onto for so long. As she began to explore her identity and become comfortable with it, she came to believe that she had truly found a community where she felt comfortable. It wasn't that she was necessarily uncomfortable in her other friendship circles, but it was like a puzzle piece just clicked into place, and she finally had a full picture of who she was. Despite her initial uneasy feelings and confusion, Ashlea couldn't deny the deep emotional bond that she shared with Laura, and with time, Ashlea and Laura decided to take their relationship to the next level. This meant Ashlea would reveal her secret. She would fully commit to Laura and let the world know. When it came time to tell her loved ones, it didn't exactly go smoothly. Many of Ashlea's friends were accepting and told her it made no difference who she was with. They were going to love Ashlea no matter what. But when Ashlea told her mother, it was a different story. Ashlea got the courage to reveal her true self to her mom, Monica, and her stepdad, Chuck, in 2004. With honesty and vulnerability, she shared that she was identifying as a lesbian and that she had a girlfriend. In response, Monica expressed that, deep down in her heart, she always knew this about her daughter. But Monica admitted that she needed time to fully accept and understand this new aspect of Ashlea's life. Naturally, Ashlea was hurt, but she agreed to give her mom some time. Monica, being deeply religious, was struggling to reconcile the love she had for her daughter with the teachings that she knew from the Bible. So, Monica prayed, wanting guidance in the situation. Eventually, she came to a conclusion. God had given her Ashlea, and he wouldn't have done that if she was meant to just throw away their relationship. He would not have given her a daughter to protect, love, clothe, and feed, and then just take her away. So, Monica decided that she loved her daughter more than anything else, and she couldn't imagine a world where they didn't talk anymore. In the end, she and Ashlea mended the relationship and resumed going to their bingo nights. Ashlea and Laura remained together. Laura's love revealed that Ashlea was generous and caring as a girlfriend throughout the 3 years they dated. However, the relationship eventually came to an end due to their divergent aspirations in life. Laura was older, ready to settle down and have kids, while Ashlea was having fun, trying to figure out her path in life with no idea where it would take her. However, the two girls still hung out as friends, spending plenty of time in their mutual friend group. Despite parting ways romantically, Ashlea and Laura managed to maintain a strong friendship over the years. Laura recalled Ashlea's excitement when she received the news of being hired at American Eagle Outfitters in the Hulen Mall in Fort Worth, Texas, in the fall of 2011. Ashlea loved this job. She liked it because she got to meet new people every day, and she took pride in her work. Retail suited her well. Over time, she worked her way up to assistant manager at the Hulen location. Her boss, Chris Cravey, said that she was one of his favorite employees. Other people who worked at the store had nothing but great things to say about Ashlea. One of them even commented that she would go the extra mile for any of the employees on her shift. She didn't just teach them about work, she taught them about life. She was one of the happiest people they knew. I can actually tell from her pictures that she exudes happiness and joy. She's always smiling, and I can tell she's one of those goofy, fun people. And that's exactly the way she was described by friends. One of Ashlea's remarkable qualities was her ability to inspire her staff. She had a unique talent for recognizing the potential in others, even if they couldn't see it in themselves. Ashlea believed in her employees and encouraged them to strive for greatness. Whether through her words of encouragement or leading by example, she motivated her team to be the best versions of themselves. In addition to her life lessons with her coworkers, Ashlea loved to document her everyday life on social media. The topics ranged from what she was wearing that day to whether she was feeling tired or happy. Work was one of her favorite places to be, and it truly showed on camera. She was sort of a vlogger, and back then it was much more rare in the early 2000s. But a few years had gone by, with Ashlea dating people on and off, but nothing really stuck. One day in the summer of 2014, she went out to a restaurant with some friends. Ashlea had been having a really bad day and wasn't in her usual chipper mood. Their waitress, April Moffat, thought Ashlea was so cute and tried to get her to smile, but she didn't have any luck. At the time, April, not knowing Ashlea at all, didn't think much of it and proceeded with her shift as usual. But destiny had a path for them. A few weeks later, Ashlea recognized April and reconnected through social media. It was like the universe conspired to bring them back together somehow. When Ashlea saw April on Instagram, she followed her. The two girls got to talking, and decided to meet up and take their dogs on a walk. Ashlea's dog, Nala, was her biggest priority, no matter what she had going on in her life. She made sure Nala was taken care of. April brought along her dog Cooper. April said that she and Ashlea had an undeniable connection. She described Ashlea as having a magnetic force that made it hard not to love her instantly. After the walk with their dogs, Ashlea and April were practically inseparable, and soon they became a couple. By the end of the summer of 2014, Ashlea's life was going really well. She found herself content and fulfilled, both in her career and her personal life. She had been contemplating a career shift and was considering joining the loss prevention department at American Eagle Outfitters. This decision was spurred by a robbery at the store. It happened on August 24th at 1 a.m. It was all caught on video. A robber, dressed in all black, went behind the counter and took $188,000 from their safe. The robbery occurred the day after Texas tax-free weekend. Once a year, Texas allows people to purchase certain items tax-free, like shoes, clothing, backpacks, and usually school supplies. This helps lessen the burden for parents during back-to-school shopping. Because of this, tax-free weekend is one of the busiest times of the year for retail stores like American Eagle, and they make more money than usual. That is why the store was hit the next day. Ashlea, being influenced by her father's and stepdad's careers in law enforcement, was inspired to look over the surveillance video and work closely with loss prevention to try to identify the perpetrator. She believed she could contribute to the company's safety and security going forward, and she hoped she could work her way up to a position in loss prevention. Meanwhile, there was something else Ashlea was trying to work on: her relationship with April. Like most couples, the relationship had its ups and downs. Towards the end of November 2014, the two had decided to take a small break to reevaluate their feelings. The plan was for April to go over to Ashlea's on November 28th, or Black Friday. It's the biggest shopping day of the year, the day after Thanksgiving, when all the biggest sales happen to prepare for the holiday season. Ashlea and April planned to meet up so they could talk about what they wanted to do moving forward. However, the day before they planned to meet, they decided to postpone the conversation. Unfortunately, they would never get the chance to mend the relationship, because just before 8 a.m. on November 28th, Black Friday, a 911 call came in from the River Ranch Apartments in the suburb of Fort Worth, Texas. That's the apartment complex where Ashlea lived. One of her neighbors, Patrick Sweet, who lived directly below her, knew her and was friends with her. He had woken up around 7:30 that morning to loud voices and a hard thump right above him. A few minutes later, he heard Ashlea's front door shut, so he figured she was going to work. Patrick rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, but before he could, his carbon monoxide alarm started to go off. He was confused, so he began to investigate. This is when he noticed that there was water leaking from the ceiling of his bathroom. Putting two and two together, Patrick believed there could be a fire in Ashlea's apartment, so he quickly called 911 to report it. Now I have a little bit of this audio I'm going to play for you now.
Fire department, what's the address to your emergency? Yeah, hi, I'm gonna live over at River Ranch Apartments, and I think there's a fire upstairs in the apartment above me. Stay with me, I'll get someone in there out.
Patrick was not the only one who noticed something was wrong. By the time he was dressed and headed outside, a small crowd had started to form. Among them were friends of Ashlea's, all wondering what was going on. One friend, Jeff Kaiser, decided not to wait for the fire department when he saw where the fire was coming from. It was his friend, 31-year-old Ashlea Harris's apartment. He ran up to her door, looking through the windows to see if she was inside. Just as he was about to attempt to open the door, one of the on-site maintenance workers came running upstairs and helped Jeff kick the door down. Immediately, Ashlea's dog, Nala, came darting out of the apartment, and luckily she was caught by bystanders before she could get very far. Now, Jeff and that worker made 3 attempts to enter the apartment and search for Ashlea. They kept having to run back to the front door to catch their breath each time before trying to go back because the smoke was so thick and water was spraying from the sprinkler system. Jeff yelled for Ashlea as he crawled midway into the apartment to the kitchen, before the smoke forced him to go back out for fresh air. They had seconds to search with each attempt, but the smoke was too overpowering for them to make any progress. I'm actually impressed with their efforts, risking their own lives for another human being. By 8 a.m., the fire department was on the scene. When Fort Worth Fire Department Lieutenant Jared Pavko arrived, a resident told him that there was a possibility that someone was inside the apartment. But at that point, everyone who knew Ashlea believed she was already on her way to work, considering it was Black Friday, the biggest shopping day of the year. They assumed she wasn't going to miss that, and they thought the fire had somehow started after she left for work. Maybe the stove was left on, a straightening iron, a candle, or something like that. But they were all trying to get a hold of her and let her know what was going on, but no one could get a response. They thought maybe she was busy opening the store. At least that's what they hoped. Firefighters were entirely unprepared for the scene that they would find inside Ashlea's apartment. Once the blaze had been put out, the fire lieutenant could tell that the fire had started in the bedroom, specifically on the bed, which had been badly damaged. He opened a window to the room to allow all the smoke to clear. It was easy for firefighters to tell that this fire was not an accident and that they needed to call the Fort Worth Police Department and get an arson inspector on the scene. Not just because they suspected foul play when it came to the fire, but because of what they found in the middle of the bedroom floor. In front of the bed, on the floor, was a lifeless body of a female, and they could tell she did not die as a result of the fire. The fire lieutenant grabbed her arm, and that's when he noticed that her wrists were duct-taped. She had been bound and badly beaten. After he was unable to detect a pulse, he radioed for a request for the police and the CSI to come to his location. Then, the team quickly retreated out of the apartment to preserve it as a crime scene. Ashlea's friends were still waiting outside for some sort of update, and they weren't sure what to make of the firefighters' behavior. It wasn't until police showed up and began to put crime scene tape around the building that it began to dawn on them that maybe they weren't able to reach Ashlea because she had been inside when the fire started. Laura Love remembers how much she used to love Black Friday before that day in 2014. It used to be her favorite day of the year. She loved to go shopping and she loved a great deal. But that year changed everything. She got a call from a friend telling her that Ashlea's apartment was on fire, and Laura was shocked. By 8:45 a.m., Wallace E. Hood Jr., a veteran arson investigator with the Fort Worth Fire Department, was on the scene. By that time, the fire in the apartment had already been extinguished, and during his investigation, he located multiple origins of the fire, including the bed, on the victim's body, and in the closet. He noticed the smoke detector had actually been removed and was underneath the mattress. In his professional analysis of the scene, he believed the ignition source was some form of open flame, such as a match or a cigarette lighter. He ruled out all accidental sources of ignition, concluding that this fire was set on purpose. As a matter of fact, he located an empty bottle of rubbing alcohol found on the floor in the bedroom. There were also some liquid stains burned into the bed frame, as well as burn marks in a liquid pattern on the victim's body. It looked like the rubbing alcohol was used as an accelerant and poured directly on the various points of origin to start the fire. Typically, though, most arsonists will not use rubbing alcohol for this purpose because it doesn't burn fast enough, long enough, or hot enough to truly be effective. He also added that he thought the fire might have actually been an afterthought, or at least not part of the person's original plan. Wallace believed this for two reasons. The first was the use of that rubbing alcohol as an accelerant, which again is not typical. And the second was that the sprinklers in the apartment were obvious. If someone had planned to set a fire and actually put thought into it, they would have looked for the sprinklers. These sprinklers helped stop the fire before it even burned away the evidence, so they would have knocked them down or maybe not even started the fire at all. The investigators thanked him for his time and used his findings as the foundation for their criminal investigation. One thing was for sure, this was an arson, and it looked like the fire was set to cover up a murder. Next, the homicide investigators were called in when Fort Worth detective Jerry Cedillo, who was on call that weekend for Thanksgiving, and his partner Ernie Pate arrived at the River Ranch Apartments where Ashlea lived around 10:22 a.m. There was a crowd of her loved ones outside, 40 to 50 of her friends, family, and co-workers, standing outside the apartment. These detectives were not expecting that, and they had to get the situation under control. They were all waiting for news about Ashlea. They wanted information, but they would have to wait. Once the scene was cordoned off and secured, the detectives made their way upstairs and into Ashlea's unit. Detective Cedillo looked around in the living room, which was already decorated for Christmas, with a tree and holiday pillows and even wrapping paper stacked up next to a wall, like Ashlea had been in the middle of wrapping gifts. But the detective didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, nothing that indicated a struggle had occurred in that area. But of course, he was directed toward Ashlea's bedroom, and he was immediately confronted with the sight of the victim lying on the ground. He could tell that her hands had been duct-taped behind her back, and her ankles were duct-taped as well. She had been bludgeoned and suffered serious head and face trauma, possibly even tortured. They carefully turned over her body, and that's when they saw that her throat had actually been cut, and she had been set on fire. There was evidence of a very violent struggle. This was a gruesome murder. There was so much blood that had soaked into the carpet and actually appeared to have dyed it red. The detectives began to look around the apartment for clues and to collect and mark evidence. Ashlea's makeup bag and her wallet were lying open on her bathroom counter. Detectives matched the driver's license picture to the victim and preliminarily identified her as Ashlea Ann Harris. It didn't take long for the news of this fire to spread throughout the community, and word got to Ashlea's best friend, Stephanie Naylor. Just like Laura Love, Stephanie got a call from a mutual friend telling her that Ashlea's apartment was on fire. She was like, "What do you mean?" So she raced over, concerned about her friend's well-being, and joined that growing crowd. Among the people there was Ashlea's boss from American Eagle, Chris Cravey, and he kept asking authorities if he could speak to Ashlea, but the response they received was that she was unavailable at the moment. So hours went by and they were still waiting, assuming that Ashlea had already been taken care of or was being interviewed about the blaze. But all that hope was dashed when the coroner's vehicle pulled up. Chris Cravey lost it. He knew what it meant in that moment. At the same time, the detectives walked towards the crowd and began asking them questions. The very first question brought Ashlea's best friend Stephanie to her knees. Detective Cedillo asked if Jeremiah 29 verse 11 meant anything to them. Stephanie fell to the ground. Her knees just gave out from under her. She responded, "That's Ashlea's tattoo." Ashlea was known for her tattoos, and she had already been preliminarily identified by her license, but also by a tattoo she had on the side of her body, her first initial and last name. But Ashlea also had that scripture from Jeremiah 29 verse 11 tattooed, and it read, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." But Ashlea did not have a future. Her life had ended, and those words seemed so empty when all hope is gone and no future remains for Ashlea. Her friends knew she was dead, but they didn't know how this could have happened. This is when the next phase of the investigation started. There were dozens of potential witnesses just waiting right outside, and they would need to interview all of them before they started to slip away. So, police directed everyone who was waiting outside to go into the apartment's leasing office and made it clear that anyone who tried to leave without their permission would be arrested for not cooperating with the police investigation. One person was missing from the scene: Ashlea's girlfriend, April. Now, remember, they had taken a break, and they were initially supposed to reconnect that day to talk about their future together. That conversation was supposedly called off, but now Ashlea is dead. So of course, one of the people on scene texted April around 1 o'clock that afternoon and simply asked her if she'd heard about the fire in her apartment. Not too long after that, someone else texted April with "Call me." She made that call. She was terrified that something happened to Nala, Ashlea's dog, assuming that Ashlea was at work. So she asked, "Is Nala okay?" And the friend said yes. So April asked, well, where's Ashlea? And that's when the friend simply said, Ashlea is gone. Well, this didn't register with April. She was like, gone from where the apartment. So she was like, well, is she okay? And that's when the friend was more clear. She said, no, Ashlea is dead. April was in total disbelief. She just threw her phone across the room because she did not believe this could be true. Now, Ashlea's mom, Monica, and her stepfather, Chuck, were out of town when all this was happening. Initially, they were informed that a fire had broken out at Ashlea's apartment complex, but they had very limited information and hoped Ashlea's unit was not affected. But then, Chuck got a call from Ashlea's biological father, Tommy Harris. Tommy had been informed by detectives that Ashlea had been killed, and now he had the heartbreaking job of relaying this message to Ashlea's mother and stepfather. Monica saw Chuck wiping tears away from his face as he spoke on the phone, and she knew that her prayers for Ashlea's safety had not been answered. This was just the beginning of the horrifying news this family would receive. Next to receive the news was Ashlea's sister, Melissa. Chuck tried calling her but didn't get an answer, so he left a message with her husband. He ended up calling Melissa, and by the tone of his voice, she knew that something was wrong. So she shouted, "What happened to my mom?" thinking, at her mother's age, that it could have possibly been an accident or that she had died. But that's when she heard him say, "It's not your mom, it's Ashlea." She was not expecting to hear that. It was unbelievable. And at this point, the family had limited information about what had happened to their loved one. It would be much worse than they could have ever imagined. Back at the scene, investigators were questioning Ashlea's friends. Detective Cedillo noted that in the wallet where Ashlea's ID was found, her credit and debit cards and cash were still inside, and no other high-value items were taken from her apartment. It seemed like the motive was definitely not robbery. So, to Cedillo, this meant that whoever murdered Ashlea had known her personally, because they had to have had an alternative motive, and that appeared to be much deeper from the viciousness of this crime. In order to get to the bottom of this, he decided it was time to question those witnesses. One of them was Alexis Torres. She explained that she had seen Ashlea the previous afternoon at a gathering with friends on Thanksgiving Day. According to her, Ashlea had to work on Thanksgiving in order to prep the store, American Eagle, for Black Friday. It was going to be a rush the next day. Ashlea was scheduled to work from 6 p.m. to 3 o'clock in the morning. The mall actually closed at 8 p.m., but the after-hours Black Friday preparations would then begin thereafter, and she would most likely not get off work until after 3 o'clock. So their group of friends decided to have an early Thanksgiving dinner so that Ashlea could attend. Now, during dinner, Alexis had agreed to go over to Ashlea's apartment during her shift to stay with Nala. This was not a strange request. Everyone knew how much Nala meant to Ashlea, and she wouldn't want to leave her alone too long. Ashlea finally arrived back home from work at around 3:40 a.m., those early morning hours of November 28th, and Alexis was there to greet her. They visited with one another in Ashlea's apartment until about 4:45 in the morning. At that point, Ashlea needed some sleep because she told Alexis she had to take a nap before waking up and heading right back into work for Black Friday. Alexis also told Detective Cedillo that Ashlea had asked her to stay over, but she couldn't because she had her dad's truck that night and needed to take it back to him. That was the last time she saw Ashlea. Alexis said she remembers Ashlea locking the door when she left. Then about 2 hours later at 6:56 a.m., Ashlea attempted to call Alexis, but she missed the call. So, about 2 to 3 minutes later, when she noticed she had a missed call from Ashlea, Alexis said she tried to call her back, but she was unsuccessful in reaching her. If Alexis's story is true, then that meant whoever committed this heinous crime had done so between the hours of 6:56 am and 7:30 a.m. that morning, and that's not a big window of opportunity. So, Cedillo decided to keep his eye on Alexis, but he knew he had a lot more interviewing to do. Now remember the man who called 911? Patrick Sweet. Well, when he was interviewed by detectives, he provided some very crucial information, much more than he did on that 911 call. On the morning of November 28th, he was awakened by what sounded like a scream, and then he glanced at his clock, which showed it was 7:30, a.m. This was only about 30 minutes from the time that Alexis missed Ashlea's call. So Patrick laid in bed, wondering what was going on upstairs, and that's when he heard a loud thud right above him and could hear labored breathing. Patrick was sitting there thinking, "What should I do?" And that's when he heard Ashlea's front door close. He was thinking it was her going to work. So he got up and looked outside for confirmation, and he did this because what he heard was concerning. When Patrick looked out the window, he saw a darkly tinted black Infiniti driving away, and that was not the vehicle that Ashlea drove. But not wanting to assume the worst, he figured maybe a friend or a coworker of hers had picked her up for work. So he laid back down and tried to go back to sleep. But before he could, his carbon monoxide detector went off. So now he went to check his apartment for problems, and that's when he noticed that water was dripping from his ceiling in the bathroom. This was from the automatic sprinkler system, and it was triggered by the smoke and fire. He figured it must be happening upstairs since it wasn't happening in his unit. And that is when he called 911. But why hadn't he mentioned the screams? Well, he told detectives that after calling 911, he then took some of his belongings and moved his car across the street away from the apartment building. Before firefighters arrived, he saw a neighbor from the back of the building and one of the maintenance men enter Ashlea's apartment. At that point, he was unaware that Ashlea was inside until later when he saw the looks on the firefighters' faces. At that point, he realized that the noises he heard earlier were out of the ordinary, and that's why he told detectives about them. I know no one wants to assume the worst, but if you hear something like that, I would encourage you to just call 911. I know that sometimes operators will give you a hard time if you didn't see anything, but it's better they come out and check, because you'd rather be safe than sorry. Now detectives interviewed Jeff Kaiser, the friend who kicked in Ashlea's door with the maintenance person. He said he woke up to the sound of fire alarms that same morning. He quickly got dressed and ran over to the building where Ashlea lived. He saw her truck parked outside, so when a neighbor said they thought that smoke was coming from her unit, Jeff didn't hesitate. He ran upstairs and kicked open her door. Jeff said the door was locked and the deadbolts were engaged, which was actually interesting to detectives. How did the killer gain entry to her apartment if her doors were locked, but now they have another clue? Ashlea's white Dodge pickup. Detective Cedillo wanted to search inside, but the keys to that vehicle were missing. They searched the apartment but couldn't find where Ashlea kept them or had put them. Could the killer have taken them and then locked Ashlea's door behind them? It was a possibility. The crime scene was still being processed, so for now, Detective Cedillo moved on and interviewed another neighbor, Stephen Lee. He was a former law enforcement officer who lived right downstairs and diagonally across from Ashlea. According to Stephen, he had the very same routine every morning. He would go outside and smoke a cigarette around 7 Arkanks. Man, just watch the parking lot. He did this every day. Due to his background as an officer, he said he found it peaceful. That morning, he noticed one car that didn't belong. It was a black Infiniti G35 with a faded toll tag sticker on the roof, and it was parked right next to Ashlea's white pickup truck. While this car stuck out to him, and he had never seen it in the parking lot before, he wasn't actually suspicious because it was the holidays, and anyone could be there visiting family or friends. But Stephen said the car was still parked there when he left for work around 7:30 a.m. But recall that Patrick also noticed this car and said it was driving away sometime after 7:30, because that's when he first woke up to those screams. So now, Cedillo goes back to the people he already interviewed and asks them if they knew anything about a black Infiniti. They said no. However, Alexis passed this information on to Chris Cravey, who was still waiting in the crowd. Now, earlier that morning, one of his other assistant managers had called him to say that Ashlea had not shown up for her shift, and they couldn't get a hold of her. They had also heard a rumor that her apartment might be on fire. So, Chris rushed over there to her complex, hoping that he could help Ashlea in some way. But of course, we know what happened after he arrived. When he hears this new information, his heart sank, and he ran as fast as he could to speak with detectives. Chris was confident he knew whose car that was. Chris tells Cedillo he had a former employee who drove a black Infiniti G35. Their name was Carter Cervantes. To Cedillo's surprise, Chris makes him aware that Carter is a 25-year-old woman. Many people who live in this area work at establishments nearby, like the mall. But Chris tells Cedillo that Carter worked at the Amarillo, Texas location. That's actually 5 hours away. So now it seemed even more of a remote possibility that this woman could have been all the way over in Fort Worth. Many people drive Infiniti G35s. It's one of the most popular models. So, Cedillo thanks Chris for this information, but then goes back to focus on the evidence at the crime scene. He was there until after 1:30 that morning. It had been a long day, so Cedillo decided to head home and get some sleep before continuing with the investigation. However, no matter what he tried to do, he could not stop thinking about this case. So, in the early morning hours, he decided he'd had enough, and he got up to start his day. He had nothing to go on except the name Chris had given him of the woman who drove that black Infiniti. So he decided to look her up, and he found her address. To his surprise, she was living approximately 2 miles from Ashlea's apartment, so this could mean it was normal for her to be in that area. Maybe she was visiting a friend, or maybe she was connected to the crime. She was already connected to Ashlea through the fact that they both worked at American Eagle. So, Cedillo figured that he would dig deeper. He decided to drive by that address on file in the early morning hours of Saturday, November 29th, but there was no sign of a black Infiniti in the parking complex. So, Cedillo decided to wait outside for Carter to emerge from her residence. Meanwhile, he called Chris for all the information he had on this former employee. Chris explained that, initially, Carter was hired at the location in Amarillo, Texas, and she worked there for a considerable amount of time. By the time she was 24, she had worked her way up to an assistant manager. From what Chris gathered from other employees, Carter was nice to your face and tried to be your friend, but you actually wanted to be on her good side. Because once she had something against you, it seemed like she would do whatever it took to make sure you were working in a living hell. Lots of drama surrounded her when it came to her interactions with other store employees. While she wasn't anyone's favorite manager, nothing too major happened. It was kind of the usual office gossip. There were no rules broken until Carter hired 19-year-old David Mallory. Not only did she give him special preferential treatment, but it was rumored that the two of them were romantically involved, which was against the rules. She was his superior. She was in charge of his payroll, his schedule, who he worked with, and it wasn't allowed. When word traveled to their district manager, Carter was given 2 choices: quit or get transferred to another location. This wasn't that out of the ordinary. It happens. People meet at work and get involved with one another. And Carter wasn't a terrible employee, so they gave her those options. She chose to move to a different location. That way both she and her new boyfriend could remain gainfully employed and stay together. For whatever reason, Carter decided to move 6 hours away to work at the Fort Worth American Eagle location at the Hulen Mall, the same location that Ashlea was working at as an assistant manager as well. Now, employment for Carter's much younger boyfriend at the Amarillo location did not last very long. Maybe he was only working there to be close to Carter, because after she left, he missed 3 shifts in a row, which means you get automatically terminated. He was put in their system as not suitable for rehire at any American Eagle location. Eventually, he moved in with Carter all the way in Fort Worth. Soon after Carter began working at the location, word got around to Chris that Carter had something against Ashlea, who was loved by everyone. She was regarded as the mother of that store. Chris thought Ashlea was a phenomenal employee, so he inquired about this supposed tension. Lindsay Green, another American Eagle employee, told Chris she believed that Carter saw Ashlea as her competition because Carter was trying to catch the attention of the district manager so that she could get a promotion. Well, that's not that out of the ordinary. It's pretty normal that there's some sort of competition between employees. But then, in June 2014, Chris had to take a leave of absence for medical reasons, and since he knew Ashlea longer, he trusted her to manage the store while he was gone. She was temporarily moved into a management position and was appointed to run the entire store. Well, that didn't seem to go over well with Carter, but Chris was back from surgery before any problems occurred. However, while Chris was out, Carter found a very creative way to circumvent the American Eagle system. She was able to hire her boyfriend David at the Fort Worth location. What did she do? She just altered David's social security number in the database, making it look like he was a brand new employee, so that do not hire alert didn't show up. None of the employees at the store knew David, so it never raised any red flags. But then, just 2 months later, in August on the 24th, the Fort Worth location was robbed. Remember, this happened the day after tax-free weekend, and I told you that once a year, Texas allows people to purchase their items tax-free. It's one of the busiest times of year for retail stores like American Eagle. The day after the money was collected and still in the safe, Chris tells Cedillo that Yasmin was the one who found the safe open with $188,000 missing when she opened the store the following morning. The footage showed an individual walk straight to the safe and open it. The thing is, you had to have a key in order to gain access. This meant this person was in possession of one of the store keys because they easily opened it, took the money, and walked right out of the store. They knew it had to be someone who worked at American Eagle, either in the past or present, because they didn't trip the alarm or even have to search around. They just went straight to where they knew the money would be. Remember, Ashlea was interested in possibly working with loss prevention, so she diligently looked over that video footage from 1:14 on August 24th. Upon further investigation, the key was found left inside the safe, and it belonged to an assistant manager named Yasmin. But Yasmin had not closed the store the night before the theft occurred, and she didn't appear to be the person in the video. It was apparent that the back door had been left open just a crack, which allowed this individual to enter. Now, everyone believed this had to be an inside job. Given all of this evidence, Ashlea was confident that the person who came inside was David Mallory, and, by extension, Carter, since she was his girlfriend, and she had closed the store the night before. Yasmin informed Chris that she had left her store keys unattended on a table for approximately 5 minutes the previous day while Carter was in that area folding jeans. Later that night, at closing, Carter insisted on being the one to take out the trash, even though normally she assigned that task to someone else. The trash was taken out through the back door, and when she came back inside, they noticed she failed to secure the door on purpose. It made perfect sense. Also, when they called the police and also called Carter that morning to tell her they needed all hands on deck, Carter responded with, "I don't know what the big deal is. Insurance can cover this." And until this point, Chris had been completely unaware that Carter had hired David to work at the store. Once all these pieces came together, Chris and Ashlea informed Carter she was suspended until further notice. She calmly handed over her store keys and then just exited the store. Then, 1 week later, Chris called Carter and told her she had been terminated for leaving the store unsecured. She was really upset and requested the regional manager's phone number. Despite everyone believing that Carter and David were responsible, they were never arrested or formally declared suspects. In fact, this incident would have probably been insignificant to the case at hand if it wasn't for the fact that Ashlea was the one to say something about thinking this was Carter. And even though she was never charged with theft, she was let go from her position at the company. And after this, David did it again. He stopped showing up for his shifts and was fired, just like he had been at the other location. After hearing all this, the detective was more sure than ever that they were on the right track. Based on his findings, he put in an application for 2 search warrants. The first was for David and Carter's cell phone records, and the second was for their vehicles. The evidence found in both would be shocking, but for now, it was a waiting game. Cedillo and his partner, Ernie Pate, were outside in their vehicles, parked in Carter's parking lot. They identified a white Cadillac that matched the license plate and description of the one David owned. Now, Cedillo had his eyes on both cars as he waited. 4 hours later, at 7:45 a.m., he saw the lights on the black Infiniti flash, like someone had remotely unlocked the doors. Sure enough, Cedillo observed Carter and David emerge from the complex and walk through the parking lot towards the vehicle. David got in the driver's seat, and Carter jumped in beside him in the passenger side. Then they drove away, with Cedillo following close behind in an unmarked car. The detectives could not believe where they were headed. They pulled right into the parking lot of the Hulen Mall, which is where the American Eagle store was, where Ashlea worked. Cedillo was automatically suspicious. I mean, they were driving to where a murder victim was last seen before she returned home, to be killed and set on fire. Not to mention, it's where two people had been accused of robbing 2 months earlier. So Cedillo knew it was also too early for mall patrons to be inside. The only people inside would be employees. He knew that both David and Carter had been fired from their jobs at American Eagle, so why were they headed there? When David parked the car, only Carter got out and walked into the mall by herself, wearing black pants, shoes, a black scarf, and a dark gray sweatshirt. Cedillo parked his car and followed Carter, while Pate stayed back to question David. When questioned, David told Detective Pate that he drove Carter over to the mall so she could fill out new employee paperwork at the Aeropostale store. She had recently been hired there. Pate relayed this information to Cedillo as he proceeded inside the mall to see if it was true, while Pate stayed with David. That's when he learned that David was driving without a license, which is a misdemeanor in Texas, so he was able to take David into custody. Their goal was to talk to him and secure the black Infiniti for analysis. They were still waiting on search warrants to be approved. Meanwhile, Cedillo was speaking with the manager at Aeropostale, who was telling him he had no idea who Carter was and had definitely not hired her. This confirmed the detective's suspicions, and he headed for American Eagle to see if he could find Carter there. His thought was that she was there to rob the store after the biggest sale of the year, when the most money would be in that safe. Carter's former co-workers had told Chris that she had once joked that if she were ever going to steal a deposit, it would be on Black Friday or tax-free weekend. Well, we know that she and David possibly already took that $118,000 on tax-free weekend. So Cedillo was convinced she was trying to get her hands on even more cash. Retail stores can bring in anywhere from $7,000 to even over $100,000 in cash after Black Friday, and Carter knew that. But instead of finding Carter at the front of American Eagle, he found Chris waiting outside a locked gate. He asked Chris, "Why aren't you opening the door?" And he said, well, the corporate office had changed the lock after hearing about Ashlea's murder, and he was waiting on someone to bring him the new key. Now, Detective Cedillo was kind of caught off guard. The reason for this was that he had made sure not to tell anyone that the only thing missing from Ashlea's apartment was her key ring. Only law enforcement knew that information. On that ring was the key to her truck, which was still in the parking lot, her keys to her apartment, and her keys to the American Eagle store. All of them were missing. And of course, detectives noted that her apartment door had been locked before her neighbor broke it down. This confirmed that whoever killed Ashlea had also stolen her keys. Cedillo had put 2 and 2 together. Carter knew Ashlea had the keys to the store since she was the other assistant manager. It was all coming together. Cedillo asked Chris why the locks were changed, since he hadn't told Chris that Ashlea's keys were gone. And Chris explained, no, this is company policy. The locks are always changed after a key holder dies or is fired. To Cedillo, he thought it was most likely that whoever stole the keys didn't know about this policy when they took them, and that person was most likely Carter. Cedillo asked Chris if he happened to see Carter walk by, and he said he had not. Well, Cedillo felt like he was on the right track. He headed back to Carter's apartment complex to try to track her down, and it didn't take him long to find her. She was in the business office of the complex, where the laundry facilities were located, and she was no longer wearing her black baggy clothes. Instead, she was in bright pink scrubs. She willingly went back to the police station for questioning. Now, Cedillo started with very simple questions, just small talk. One of the first ones was whether she went by Carter or Carol, and she said Carter. Carol was her middle name. This woman was calm, she was pleasant, She appeared to be educated and well-spoken, and she also didn't seem to know why she was being questioned. She actually asked Cedillo why she was there, and he explained there had been a recent attempt at a robbery in the mall, and anyone who was there that day had to be questioned. Carter seemed to calm down after this, and then Cedillo eased back into the interview or interrogation. He asked Carter what she did for Thanksgiving and what she ate, and Carter just happily responded, "All about the turkey I made. There was stuffing, mashed potatoes, and green beans casserole, and this cabbage bacon salad that my mother really likes to make. But I don't think David liked it very much."
I made turkey, and there was stuffing and mashed potatoes and green bean casserole, and this cabbage bacon salad that my mom really likes to make, but I don't think David liked it very much.
Cedillo asked her where she went to school, and she said she attended West Texas A&M University. He wanted to know what brought her to Fort Worth, and she explained that she had a job opportunity with American Eagle. He knew there was much more to that story, but at the time of the interview, Cedillo didn't question her much about her answer. Carter actually admitted she was let go in September due to leaving a door unlocked, which allowed a robber to gain access to the store. She also said she was the manager of the store, which was not true. Now, she told Cedillo she was doing volunteer work at a local hospital, thus explaining her scrubs. Instead of pressing her on any of the things he knew about David and Carter stealing from American Eagle, he asked her what she and her boyfriend did after Thanksgiving dinner. Carter told him they watched movies until they went to bed. She seemed so ordinary and so innocent in this interview, but at that point, Cedillo's questioning got a little more serious. He asked Carter to walk him through what she had done that morning. She told him she woke up around 7:30 or 7:45. She said she talked to David for a little while, then went back to sleep. When she woke up, David wasn't there. Well, Cedillo knew this was a straight-up lie, so he let her know that. But Carter denied she was lying. She said, "How is that a lie?" And Cedillo responded, "You know how I know it's a lie? Because I saw you come out of your apartment and get into your car with David. That's how I know it's a lie."
Good morning.
Okay,
All right?
this morning,
Okay, what time do you get up?
about 7:30,
Okay.
7:45.
And then what happens then?
And then we talked, and I went back to sleep. When I woke up, he wasn't there.
Okay, I know that's a lie.
No, it's not.
You know why I know it's a lie?
Why do you know it's
Because
a lie?
I saw you come out of your apartment and get in the passenger seat of that car, and I saw him drive out of there. That's why I know it's a lie.
Carter became irritated, saying that she knew what she did that morning. She wasn't lying, and she knew where she went. She wasn't giving in to Cedillo's persistence, even though he told her she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life by lying to him. But she just wouldn't quit. She said, "No, I got up this morning, put the laundry in, I went to check my email, and that's it."
I got up, I went and put the laundry in, and I went and checked my email. That's all. You found me on my apartment floor.
At this point, Detective Cedillo had had enough, so he left the room. This was a chance to leave Carter all alone and observe her actions. She did something very strange and telling. She took a sip from a water bottle, then kind of looked at it and immediately put it down on the table. She spilled some out on purpose, grabbed a tissue, and acted like she was cleaning it up, only wiping the part where she put her mouth on it. To Cedillo, this meant she was worried that they were going to try to get a sample of her DNA and possibly find a match somewhere at the crime scene. It still wasn't hard proof of anything, though. So, Detective Cedillo saw David in the hallway at the police station. He initially thought he was wearing a toboggan, but it turned out to be a ski mask, and it was apparently in new condition, without any noticeable wear, with a plastic price tag fastener still attached. I'll get to why this is important. Photographs were taken of David, and they showed that he had a fresh injury to his lower lip, which was swollen. Unfortunately, at this point in time, Cedillo had nothing but a bad feeling, so he couldn't hold them there. David was processed on his misdemeanor charge, and then he and Carter were free to go. But by this time, the search warrant for the apartment that the couple resided in, as well as their cars and their cell phones, had gone through. They had more than enough probable cause after these interviews, and I told you the evidence would be shocking. But before I tell you the details, I want to tell you about Ashlea's autopsy results. Dr. Richard Fry, a deputy medical examiner at the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's Office, performed the autopsy on Ashlea's body. The autopsy revealed she had numerous injuries, and I didn't want to leave any of them out. She had a laceration on the right side of her scalp, a small cut with a surrounding bruise also on the right side of her scalp, a patterned bruise on the right side of her face, a bruise right between her eyes, another bruise around her left eye, a small incision across the bridge of her nose, a laceration across her right cheek with a bruise surrounding that area, a scrape on the right side of her nose and her upper lip, a bruise on her right upper lip, a laceration on the left side of her face, a scrape and a laceration on both of her lips, a scrape mark on her chin, a star-shaped laceration with a surrounding bruise behind her left ear, which was consistent with being pistol-whipped, a cut on the right side of her neck caused by a knife or sharp-bladed weapon, a bruise on the right side of her neck, bruises and abrasions on the left side of her neck. She also had petechiae, or broken blood vessels, on her neck, in her eyes, and on her throat area. She had a bruise on the front of her chest, a bruise on her right arm, a scrape on that elbow, a bruise on the back of her left arm, a bruise on the back of her left hand, another bruise at the base of her left thumb, which was likely due to the duct tape that was around her wrist. She also had an abrasion on her left pinky finger, a cut inside her upper lip, additional lacerations and bruises on the inner lower lip, and most notably, fractured C1 cartilage in her neck. Now, Dr. Fry concluded that the injuries observed on different parts of Ashlea's face indicated they were caused by multiple blows. He explained that the petechiae in her eyes reflected asphyxia or strangulation, and this would have occurred by someone actually tying a cord or rope around her neck and squeezing tightly. According to the doctor, it would take quite a while and quite a bit of pressure for someone to be fully asphyxiated. And this fracture in this part of her neck was the least common place where they see fractures from asphyxia or strangulation-type deaths. It's because it consists of cartilage that's pliable. He explained that these kinds of fractures are mostly seen in motor vehicle accidents or something involving a very significant amount of force. The sample of Ashlea's aortic blood that Dr. Fry tested was negative for carbon monoxide. This indicated that Ashlea was not alive when the fire was set. But since there were burn marks on her body that were not made by a taser, someone intentionally attempted to set her body on fire after she was deceased. Dr. Fry concluded that Ashlea's cause of death was asphyxia and blunt force trauma to her head and neck, and the manner of death was, of course, a homicide. All of this was incredibly horrific. This poor woman, it's unreal that a human being could do this to another human being. And over what? Well, money, of course, because that seemed to be the motive in this case. The first search that was conducted was of David and Carter's apartment. During the first search on November 29th, Detective Matthew Barron with the Fort Worth Police Department Homicide Unit saw a plastic tub near the front door. It contained bungee cords, rope, and he found a lock located in the kitchen drawer. In the trash, he found a box associated with a taser and a charging cord, which is why I brought it up in the medical examiner's report, stating there were no taser marks on Ashlea's body. Detective Barron also found some strands of duct tape, which were collected and analyzed to see if they matched the duct tape found on Ashlea's wrists and ankles. A damaged deadbolt lock was found in the apartment, along with 2 additional locks that had apparently been for practice. It included one conveniently labeled lock-picking practice lock. But there was something else found during this search of the apartment, a significant discovery: credit card receipts. This led investigators to these locations listed on the receipts, and through footage captured on CCTV, the detectives were able to determine that on November 21st, just days before Ashlea's murder, Carter was seen on video purchasing several items that appeared to be part of what they call a murder kit. Things like short-handed shovels, gloves, a tarp, and duct tape. I wondered if their plan had been even deeper, because why did they need shovels? I think there should be some kind of silent alarm or something that goes off when someone buys too many incriminating items all at once. But I guess one could argue you need those for some everyday gardening or home improvements. I still think that somehow stores should keep track of that. But now, under the search of Carter's Black Infinity, which was conducted by Officer J.J. Jeans with the Fort Worth Police Department Crime Scene Unit, he took photos of items that were found in the vehicle. These included a plastic bag inside a black trash bag, a sharpening stone for a knife, a 9mm card, a cell phone, a walkie-talkie, several knives. One was a folding pocket knife, another was a buck knife with a sheath, a plastic tub with some men's boots that had what looked like blood on them, and another cell phone inside those boots, some clothing, a toboggan with a hole cut in it, a tarp still inside its package, and a kitchen knife. Then, under the driver's seat, Officer Jeans found a loaded Glock 19 with a bullet in the chamber. The officer also found various documents in the car, including a receipt reflecting an order from a lockpicker's mall for a cutaway practice lock that was sent to the address of the apartment where the couple lived, and we know that one was found there. There was also a lockpicking instruction manual found during the search of the vehicle, and the floor mat from the driver's side revealed what looked like the presence of blood, so it was sent to the lab for analysis, along with those men's boots. When they searched David's Cadillac, they opened the trunk and found that pair of shovels that Carter had been seen purchasing. And guess what? They had been used. There was dirt on both of them, as well as bungee cords and zip ties in the back, and a box of plastic sheeting and a box of Craftsman sockets. To seal it up, this looked like all the items you would need to wrap up a dead body. But we know they never got that chance with Ashlea. So, was there a second victim that we didn't know about? Now on to the cell phones. In the photo roll for both David and Carter's phones, there were pictures of Ashlea's apartment complex, including photos of her front door. Clearly, they had been casing her apartment complex weeks before the murder. Then, when they looked through texts between the couple, things got worse. The two seemed to be texting about their plan to hurt Ashlea, but they were doing it so casually, like they were talking about having dinner. At one point, Carter says that she just picked up the supplies including zip ties, bungee cords, shovels, and a plastic tarp. The key about these text messages, though, was that they were purposely vague. No one text message had enough to implicate them in a crime. For example, a special agent with the FBI and a member of the Cellular Analysis Survey team found a text between David and Carter's phones that was sent at 11:52 a.m. on November 28th, which was hours after Ashlea was found dead. Here's how that exchange went. Carter texted, "Hey, remember that thing you said I didn't clean well? Did you clean it? Did we leave it behind?" David responded, "We left it. I didn't touch it." Carter texts back, "Well, damn, that's not good. Take out all the trash and leave that." Then, 5 minutes go by, and Carter texts David again, saying, "David, I need to take care of that. I'm so sorry I forgot." If all of this wasn't enough, there was one more piece that fell into place after the contents of David's cell phone were analyzed even further. One of the text messages he sent to Carter from his phone contained latitude and longitude coordinates. After entering them into Google Earth, Detective Cedillo drove to that specific location, which was near Lutters, Texas. When he arrived at the intersection of the coordinates, he discovered a hole in the ground, which he described as a prepared human grave. It was approximately 6 feet long, 2.5 feet wide, and 3 feet deep. That is unbelievable. Based on everything they had gathered, this is what they believed happened. After Carter was fired, she and David started to plot revenge on Ashlea. They decided they were going to kill her and take her keys so they could break into American Eagle again. The pair chose Black Friday because Carter knew that was when the safe would have the most money inside. So, in the early morning hours of November 28th, Carter and David both entered Ashlea's apartment. She could have still been awake from the time Alexis left around 5 a.m., but we know she told her she was going to try to take a nap. Either way, when the couple entered, Ashlea was alerted, and a fight ensued. Ashlea put up more resistance than they expected, which resulted in excessive force used by the couple. Not only was Ashlea pistol whipped and stabbed, her throat had also been slit. Because more time had passed than they had imagined, and the fight was more intense than they anticipated, they changed their original plan. They decided not to bury Ashlea, but instead to start a fire at the last minute, as an afterthought, just like the fire inspector predicted. On the way out, they took Ashlea's keys and locked her front door. Later that morning, when Carter went to the mall, she planned on quickly getting into the American Eagle safe using Ashlea's key. She was going to grab the money and then quickly change out of her darker clothes into the pink scrubs she was found in later. However, she didn't anticipate that those locks would be changed so soon. She left the mall and saw David being questioned by the police, so she walked home alone to confirm his suspicions. Cedillo has the mall pull footage from inside American Eagle and outside in the parking lot, and sure enough, they see a person who matches Carter's height and body type, dressed in black pants and wearing a gray sweatshirt with a black scarf and something wrapped around their face. The person is swiftly walking up to the roll-down gate in front of American Eagle around 8 time, on the morning after Black Friday and the day after Ashlea was found dead. This person kneels down and tries to unlock the lock, clearly not knowing that Corpet had changed the locks after Ashlea's body was found. Once they realize the key didn't work, they quickly get up and walk away. Now, on the footage from the exterior of the mall, it catches a person matching Carter's description, now wearing those same pink scrubs and that gray sweatshirt wrapped around her waist, the same exact outfit she was seen wearing at her apartment complex when Cedillo brought her in for questioning. So it's her. It stands to reason it's also her inside trying to unlock that gate. She changed real quick before exiting the mall and escaped before anyone could catch her. She walked all the way back to her apartment. After gathering all of this evidence, Detective Cedillo secured an arrest warrant for both Carter and David. On December 4th, 2014, they were charged with capital murder. Shortly after the arrest warrant was secured, a second search was conducted on Carter's apartment. This time, a business-type key was found in the kitchen trash can. This key opened the dressing rooms and the storage closet at American Eagle in the mall. The key was not in the trash during the first search of the apartment, most likely because Carter was still in possession of it at the time. 2 days later, on December 6th, David was taken into custody, and later that day, Carter turned herself in with her lawyer present as a show of good faith. At this point, does it really matter? But I guess she had to do something. Both were booked and given $500,000 bond while they awaited their trial. They were tried separately, but the evidence presented was almost exactly the same. The only difference was in their defenses, which I'll get to in a moment because I think it's pretty interesting. The prosecution showed that there was no difference between the fibers, the adhesive, the backing, the width, or the color of the duct tape found in the trash at Carter's and the duct tape found on Ashlea's body, so they could have originated from the same roll. The swabs of blood taken from the floor mat and the infinity revealed that the partial major DNA profile originated from Ashlea Harris. Her blood was also found on the boots in the car, which suggested David traced it from her apartment to the front seat as he got in and drove away. The DNA profile obtained from the swab of the grip of the Glock 19 that was found in the infinity was a mixture of David and Ashlea's DNA. Carter was excluded as the contributor, which suggested that David had used the gun to pistol whip Ashlea. I told you the evidence in both trials was the same, but the defenses were different. Well, despite her lawyer's protests, Carter wanted to take the stand and testify. She presented a very different story than the one the prosecution had laid out. She claimed that she only acted under David's orders and that she was scared of him. According to Carter, even when they lived back in their hometown, David had power over her. He controlled what she ate, what she drank, when she slept, and he forced her to rehire him when she moved to Fort Worth.
I was very afraid of David. I thought he was going to kill me, telling me what to drink, what to eat, and he made me have sex with him in the movie theater.
He had masterminded the original robbery as well. On the day that Ashlea was killed, she said she woke up and David was nowhere to be found. When he eventually came home, he handed her the American Eagle keys and told her she needed to go to that store and take the deposit. At first, she said she refused, but then he pointed the gun in her face and said it again. Carter claimed she again refused, but according to her, David became even more sinister. He told her he would kill her, And on top of that, there was someone sitting outside her parents' house right then and there. She had to do exactly what he said, or her and her parents would die.
Gave me some gloves, told me to put them on, and then he handed me a set of American Eagle teeth, and he said, go in and open the gate and bring me that fat-ass deposit, and he just pointed it at me. I shook my head, said I wasn't going to do it. And he said, you don't understand. If you don't go in, I'm going to kill them, and then I'm going to kill you.
She felt like at that point, she had no other choice but to steal the money. She described how upset she was when she realized the locks had been changed, but she said it was because she didn't know what David would do when he found out. Carter concluded her version of the story by making a startling revelation to the court. She claimed that David had brought two individuals that she referred to as ghetto men into her house with the intention of sexually violating her. His shocking allegation was apparently part of David's plan to silence her regarding the details of Ashlea's murder.
Somebody pushed me down right when I got into the apartment. He said, I'll make her follow directions. He took off my sweatpants. He pulled them down to my ankles. And they raped me. I was screaming.
Carter even tried to explain away her actions at the police station, specifically wiping down that water bottle. According to her, that was not an attempt to remove her DNA evidence. Instead, she clarified it was an act driven by a powerful memory of the violation she experienced, which caused her to feel the need to eliminate any lingering scent associated with the traumatic experience. A nice try, but she could have been an actress instead of a wannabe criminal mastermind. She might be able to cry on cue, but she was an amateur when it came to being a murderer. She left a ton of evidence behind. Her story didn't explain the text messages she exchanged, which dated back weeks before the murder. There were also messages after the murder that indicated she had been present in the apartment, even though she said she was never there during Ashlea's murder. In the end, the jury did not believe her story, and it sealed her fate. It took the jury less than 2 hours to deliberate before they unanimously agreed on a verdict of guilty for Carter. The defense attempted to pin everything on Carter, but the jury saw through this desperate attempt to excuse away such horrific actions, and they found him guilty of Ashlea's murder. Both he and his little girlfriend were handed identical sentences of life in prison without the possibility of parole. They were so young, and so was Ashlea. They all had so much of their lives to live. I don't understand the reasoning and the thinking. I know that they're young, 19 and 25 years old, but why would you ever think that money is worth taking someone's life? Not even thinking about your future, spending the rest of your life in prison. This is only a small bit of justice. Ashlea deserves so much more. Her family wanted to see them get the death penalty, but they understood it doesn't always work that way. They were grateful to all the law enforcement officers involved for seeing it all the way through to the end. They were glad that Ashlea's killers were behind bars. For her mother, Monica, she holds on to the memory of the last time she saw Ashlea. It was a week before her murder. She had called her mom and asked her to come play bingo. Monica almost didn't go. She felt like she had so much on her plate. But she listened to her gut and decided to spend time with her daughter. She will forever be grateful that she did. She'll always remember walking in and seeing the big smile on Ashlea's face and telling her, "I love you," one last time. Nowadays, Monica tries to remember her daughter in a very unique way. Even though she initially struggled with Ashlea's sexuality, she embraced the women in her life who loved her so much. Her ex-girlfriends, Laura and April. Monica takes both of them to the bingo hall on a regular basis. April has even mentioned that sometimes Monica will refer to her as her daughter. For all of them, when they gather together, they truly feel like Ashlea is still with them. In light of everything that happened to her, many of her closest friends believe that her tattoo of that Bible verse is very upsetting. I read it to you in the beginning. It's Jeremiah 29 verse 11, and it reads, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in a future." A few of Ashlea's friends have mentioned that she talked about feeling like she was going to die young. She couldn't explain why she felt that way or when, but she thought it was going to happen. She just believed that it was true. No one really knows what to make of this or her chosen verse to tattoo on her body. They just know that Ashlea was a beautiful soul who was taken too soon from this world. At 21, you spend your free time jamming on the drums with your best friends in your heavy metal band, while also enjoying moments with your new girlfriend. One day, your girlfriend isn't feeling well, so you head out to grab her something to eat, hoping it'll lift her spirits. But that was the last time Matt was seen. He vanished during that brief trip, and now I'm here to tell you what really happened to him. Matthew Robert Landry was born October 26, 1987, to Doreen and Robert Bob Landry. Matt was the youngest of 5 children. He had 2 older sisters, Christina and Gina, and 2 older brothers, Christopher and Douglas. Matt Landry loved skateboarding. He was a jokester. He liked to play all kinds of pranks on his friends and make people laugh. He was the typical boy next door with a little flair. His friends knew there would never be a dull moment hanging out with Matt because he would constantly keep you on your toes. His core group of friends were a group of guys that he started a band with, and they had been playing together for many years. He considered his bandmates his best friends. By the time Matt was 21 years old, he loved 2 things in life more than anything: his new girlfriend Francesca Bomarito and music, specifically playing the drums. Matt and his best friends had a heavy metal band, and they would frequently get together to jam out in one of the band members' basements. So they basically had a basement fan, and they were the happiest when they were playing music, especially Matt. Matt playing drums, and this guy has some serious talent. And although their band wasn't famous and they only played 1 paying gig, by 2009, they had big plans and even bigger dreams, especially for guys living in Chesterfield Township, Michigan. Today's case is taking us to yet another township, and it's in Michigan. Matt lived with his parents in Chesterfield Township, Michigan. Chesterfield Township is a charter township of Macomb County, and the population was about 34,000 back in 2009. It's north of Detroit, off of Anchor Bay, which is part of Lake St. Clair. Like many other townships, it consists of an area that has typical stores and restaurants, etc. But then it's surrounded by somewhat of a less built-up area. You can see it right here on the map. The middle section consists of all the businesses, and then just outside this line, there's more land and buildings. This is the area that Matt lived in with his parents. From what I could gather, I believe this may have been the home they lived in. It was a quaint little quiet neighborhood with houses pretty close together and close-knit. So, let's jump to the summer of 2009. Matt was 21, and he had just recently started dating Francesca. She also loved music and played the bass guitar. They had similar loves for movies and music and would spend hours watching movies at friends' houses. Although Matt had no trouble shining when he had drumsticks in his hands, he was a shy, quiet type of guy, more reserved than outgoing, a sweet, shy guy. Even when it came to getting into a relationship with Francesca, it started as a friendship. It was Francesca who really made the moves to make it more. She would invite Matt to come over and hang out, and he'd say yes. She would ask him again and again, and finally he decided to stay over one night. Everyone that knew Matt knew how much he cared about Francesca. His parents, Doreen and Bob, knew their son so well. They were very close to Matt, and they were in contact with him daily, especially his mom. He was a regular texter and caller, always keeping in touch with those he cared about, especially his best friends in his band, his mom Doreen, and now Francesca, his new girlfriend. Doreen knew this relationship was for real because Matt would just light up anytime he would mention Francesca's name. She lived about 20 minutes away from Matt in a town called Roseville. Both of them worked part-time jobs where their shifts varied. They could be on the clock until very late at night, with Francesca working at a restaurant and Matt at a pizza place called Dolly's Pizza, delivering pizzas about 8 minutes away from his house. Anytime they were not working, they would try to spend time together, even if it meant waiting up for the other's shift to end and having to start their hangout sessions late into the night or even the early morning after midnight. It didn't matter because they were in love and they wanted to be together whenever they could. On the afternoon of Saturday, August night, 2009, Matt had a session with his bandmates, and then he had to work a shift at Dolly's by the evening. Still working, Matt called his mom, worried he wouldn't be able to finish his shift because something was wrong with his green 2004 four-door Honda Accord. He told her that his car alarm kept randomly going off, which was very distracting while driving and to those on the road. So he asked her if she could swing by the house and grab her car so he could finish up his deliveries. And of course, she said yes. So he made his way over there, parked his car in the driveway, and took his mother's car back to Dolly's, using it for his deliveries until his shift ended later that night. It was close to midnight, and he was still waiting for Francesca to end her shift at the restaurant, so he went home to kill some time before they met up. It was around 2:30 in the morning when, while Doreen's husband Bob slept through a storm that was raging outside, Doreen was kept awake by the thunder and the bright lightning outside. She chose to open a book and read in the living room, leaving her husband Bob upstairs in bed sleeping. Matt was getting ready to leave for Francesca's house. He told his mom he was going to try to see what was wrong with his car before he left, so he went outside. While Doreen watched him from the living room window, she saw Matt walk around his car in the driveway, trying to figure out what to do. He knew the car alarm kept sounding off without warning, but they didn't know why. So his mom was actually hoping the alarm wouldn't start blaring right now because it was 2:55 a.m. She didn't want anyone in their quiet little neighborhood to be woken up by the alarm. But nevertheless, Doreen couldn't do much except watch her son as he tried to gently lift up the car hood just enough. Then he set the alarm off, just as she expected he would. He panicked, so he hopped into his car and sped off down the street to move his car out of the neighborhood and not wake anyone up. It was about time for Matt's girlfriend Francesca to finish her shift at the restaurant where she worked, so he just drove right to her place. Matt arrived at Francesca's with a bottle of wine in hand, and they stayed up late, having a really fun night together. But by the next morning, Francesca was not feeling well. This was a little disappointing because Matt had planned to take her to a backyard family barbecue later that afternoon, back at his parents' house. He really wanted her to meet his sister Gina's boyfriend. However, Matt was more concerned with caring for Francesca and nursing her back to health than the barbecue. Besides, he knew that Francesca wasn't going anywhere and would have plenty of other opportunities to meet his family. Her well-being came first. That was Matt's nature, to be the caregiver, which he probably got from his own mother, being so kind and loving as she was. So he made Francesca a hot bath, got her a cup of tea, and brought her a thermometer to take her temperature. He was just doing whatever he could as a caring boyfriend. After a little while, Francesca still wasn't feeling that great. She was running a fever, so Matt called his mom to let her know what was going on and even asked her, "What do you think I could do? Is there anything else I could do for Francesca?" His mom thought that Matt was doing everything he possibly could and just hoped that Francesca would feel better. Matt told his mom that Francesca was going to take a little nap, and when she woke up, they would both come over. Doreen was looking forward to it. She said what she does to all of her kids before ending each and every phone call with them, "I love you." Matt replied, "I love you too, Mom." Matt had to do some errands, so he figured he would get them done while Francesca slept. But before leaving, he asked her if she wanted anything, if she was hungry or wanted food. Initially, she accepted the offer, but then she soon realized her stomach wasn't ready for food, so she declined. She decided to take that nap, and Matt left to go get some stuff done. He told her that he would come back when he was finished, then wake her up, and they would go over to his place for that family barbecue that evening. And when Francesca woke up, expecting to find Matt at her side, but as she looked around, he wasn't there. She looked at the time and realized it was much later than she expected, 5:47 p.m. She thought Matt would wake her up before 5, so they could make it to his parents' barbecue. So she was confused and called Matt's phone. She got no answer. She texted him, but still nothing. She was just sitting there, staring at her phone, waiting for something to happen. She figured maybe he was still out running errands, so she waited for him to call or show up. But while doing so, she fell back to sleep. Meanwhile, back at Matt's parents' house, the barbecue had already begun. Doreen had noticed that her son and his girlfriend hadn't made it, but she just figured Francesca ended up too under the weather to attend and didn't think much else of it. Who would? You don't expect anything out of the ordinary to be wrong just because your 21-year-old son and his girlfriend don't show up to a barbecue after telling you they may not make it. But where was Matt? That's the question his family and loved ones would soon be asking each other. Francesca woke up yet again and started to worry because Matt continued to ignore her calls and not get back to her, which was highly unlike him. He was in constant contact with her and others, and he would always answer. If he didn't, he would call right back within just a few minutes, not hours. It was 7:31 p.m. when she called him again, with no answer. No text back, nothing. All kinds of thoughts were going through her mind because you don't immediately go to thinking something bad is happening. The initial thought can be that it's a person's choice not to answer. They're too busy, mad at you, or even in the case of a couple, maybe they're with someone else. So, it's frustrating. You care about this person and you want to know what's going on. By 9:01 p.m., Matt was still not answering Francesca's calls. So she started to think of something more sinister as an explanation. Now she was feeling very worried about Matt's well-being. As I said, you go through those stages, you're frustrated, you're angry, and then you start getting worried. Then you almost get sick to your stomach with worry, just wondering what in the world is going on. And you freak out. She started thinking maybe he got into a car accident, or his car got stuck in a ditch. After all, his car was giving him issues the past few days. Francesca's mind could not stop thinking of all the worst-case scenarios. She did not know what else to do, so she started to contact local hospitals and police departments to see if anyone matching Matt's description was there. But they didn't have anyone matching the information about Matt, reported as being injured or in trouble. It wasn't only Francesca who was concerned about Matt. On Sunday evening, Matt's childhood friend Chris Emmerich, who was also in his band, was concerned. He was in constant contact with his friends. Matt suddenly turned radio silent. He was the type of person who would text his friends all day long, hourly. So Chris was concerned and actually got in his car, starting to drive the route he knew Matt would typically take, thinking that he would find Matt's car stranded or wrecked on the side of the road. After trying to find Matt but having no luck, Chris contacted his mother, Doreen, around 9 p.m. to tell her he thought something was very wrong because he couldn't get a hold of Matt. His mom thought he was with his girlfriend, Francesca. And it's so important to have friends like this. Friends who know your routine, your character, your family, so they can quickly piece things together when something doesn't feel right. Doreen was immediately concerned when she figured out that Francesca hadn't heard from him either. In moments like these, I see a pattern. As humans, we want to do what we can with what we know. We want to use our expertise to help in some way, whether it's just to alleviate our fears or to dispel those bad thoughts. We take action. Matt's mother was a banker, so she got to work pulling up Matt's bank records to look at where he may have used his debit card last. Doreen was able to see Matt's debit card activity, but it did not alleviate her fears. She had been in the banking industry a long time and was very well versed in spotting fraudulent charges right away. Red flags started going up for her. There were 3 suspicious transactions made, 3 from the same location, back to back. All 3 were $100 withdrawals from an ATM, and it wasn't one close by. That was another red flag for her. These transactions were made from a gas station on 7 Mile Road in Detroit, Michigan. Detroit streets use a mile road system. One of the most famous is 8 Mile Road, where Marshall Mathers, aka Eminem, was born. Rapper and videographer Darnell Williams said that 8 Mile is hugely popular because of the movie, but it is the last point before the suburbs. According to Darnell Williams, 7 Mile Road is the actual city of Detroit, and the 7 Mile Road area at this point was overrun with gangs, drugs, and violence. Police officers in this area didn't even conduct night patrols anymore because it was so dangerous. Instead, bounty hunters were hired to deal with the criminals. Doreen's stomach twisted into knots. What was her son, who had just been nursing his sick girlfriend back to health, doing near 7 Mile Road in Detroit? It was at least a 30-minute drive out of the way from anywhere she knew he would normally go. She was at a loss, trying to figure out why he would be in such a scary part of town, with burned-out houses littering the area, which was basically a death trap. Doreen also knew how careful Matt was with his money. Matt would avoid ATMs with processing fees if he could. He would have gone to his local bank. He would not have made 3 withdrawals back-to-back, costing him an extra $6. She also checked her son's phone records and saw that the last time he actually used his phone was at 4:15 p.m. on Sunday. After that, it was shut off and never back on. That was very concerning. By the next morning, Monday, August 11, Doreen and Bob decided they needed to go down to the local Chesterfield Township Police Department and report Matt missing. By this time, most of Matt's close friends, including his girlfriend, Francesca, had spoken to Matt's parents, so Doreen was able to give the police all the information they had. From the last calls Matt made from his phone, according to his phone records, to the calls made to him by his friends and Francesca, and the last place he was, which was at her place. She also gave them information about the bank transactions all the way out in Detroit. Now, what happens next? I understand that there are a lot of procedures and processes in place when police are contacted about somebody being missing, especially when it's an adult. And in this case, Matt was 21 years old, and they're only working with the information they have. But it seems like in a lot of cases the cops are very judgmental. That's their first response. We've heard this time and time before. He's an adult, he's a grown man. Like it matters if you're a man or a woman, that it should be taken less seriously if you're a man, as though a man can take care of himself. Leave him alone, type of thing. They tell Doreen and Bob that Matt is a grown man who can make his own choices, and he was free to leave town, even though he lived with his parents. He didn't have to let them know where he was going. They also tell Matt's parents they need to wait, that it was very common for a 21-year-old to get drunk or high all night and then pass out at a friend's house and not call until the next day. Now mind you, he actually hadn't been seen since Sunday evening. And as far as anyone close to him was concerned, he wasn't out partying. He was taking care of his girlfriend and running some errands and even planned to go to a family barbecue. So his parents were sitting there thinking, "No, you don't know our son." And we hear that a lot. They were like, "You don't know our son. You don't know what's going on here." And in this case, Doreen and Bob actually spoke up and said, "That's not our son. That's not what he would be doing. It's out of character." Especially not speaking to anyone for the rest of the entire day and not getting in contact with them by Monday when his phone was off. So the police finally give in, and they tell Matt's parents, "We'll go ahead and put Matt in our system." But another reason the Chesterfield Township Police weren't really taking it seriously was because it was out of their jurisdiction, so to speak. Matt lived in Chesterfield Township, but he was last seen in Roseville at Francesca's house. So his parents were told that they should be calling Roseville Police Department, and they had to wait 24 hours to make an official report. So that's what they did. They waited. Meanwhile, something else completely out of the ordinary was happening in another township, so close to Chesterfield. The Roseville PD got a call that a man had just tried to rob a bank in Harrison Township. It's 16 minutes south of Chesterfield and between Chesterfield and Roseville, and it got worse. Police were notified that a young woman, only 19 years old, almost lost her life. She was held at gunpoint, so they rushed over to find out what in the world was going on. This was highly unusual for this area. When the officers arrived, they found 19-year-old Sarah Maynard, shaken beyond belief, along with staff and customers. They were telling their terrifying stories about what just happened. Sarah Maynard was on her way to cash her very first paycheck. She had just started a new job at a dog kennel. She gets out of her car to enter the Flagstar Bank branch, and she felt like someone was watching her. We've all felt that strange feeling. She turns around and notices a man with sunglasses lurking behind her. While Sarah did feel creeped out, this wasn't that uncommon, so she shrugged it off and just told herself she was being overdramatic. While she ignored this man, she walked into the bank, handed her check to the teller, and just as she did so, Sarah felt a cold metal muzzle of a gun being pushed into the back of her head with force. CCTV footage from inside this bank captured the entire event, and it is chilling to watch. As he held the gun to Sarah with his other hand on her throat, the man told her to give him $50,000 or he would kill her. This is completely terrifying. An ordinary trip to the bank and your life hangs in the balance. The teller explained to the man that she did not have that much cash, but the robber continued to threaten Sarah's life. So the teller, eventually desperate, opened the drawer and gave him everything she had. After this, the man let go of Sarah, and she turned around. She saw that the man who was threatening her was the same one who had been staring at her as she entered the bank. She was now face to face with this dangerous man. He wasn't done either. He walked around the bank, collecting wallets and cash from all of the terrified customers. He continued to threaten their lives, waving and pointing his gun at them. Can you even imagine the fear? It's unbelievable, and it's not over yet. What happens next is even more horrifying. He goes right back over to Sarah with his gun in hand, and he threatened her again. He told her to come with him, or he would kill her. This next part is so important. Please listen to this. Listen to what Sarah did. Sarah bravely refused. She sat down on the ground and told him no, she wouldn't move. She used all of her force to stay right there, glued to that bank floor no matter what. With time going by, the frustrated bank robber tried to pull her up repeatedly and repeated his demands over and over. But eventually, he gave up and fled. When the Harrison Township investigators examined the footage and saw what this suspect was capable of, they were stunned. This man was brazen, bold, and not afraid. When burglars walk into banks, they usually try to draw as little attention to themselves as possible. They'll just leave a note with the teller, but the Flagstar bank robber didn't seem to care, and the investigators believed that this robber would have done anything necessary to get what he wanted. They were surprised that he left Sarah behind and that he hardly even disguised himself. The investigator said that what Sarah did saved her life. That was a very important lesson for me to take away here. Sarah was interviewed later, and she said that, either way, something bad could have happened, but she didn't want to find out what if she went with him. At least if he decided to hurt her at the bank, the videos and the eyewitnesses would know what he did. She made the right choice. It won't always end positively like it did for Sarah, but it was an important takeaway. So you might be wondering what Sarah has to do with Matt and his case. Well, for one thing, these township police departments and the Roseville Police Department are now dealing with two unusual reports. Matt being missing and the suspicious ATM transactions, and now this bank robbery is so close in proximity. So it does correlate to them, coupled together in such a short time frame and proximity-wise. They needed to keep both of these incidents in mind as they went forward. And it's a very good thing they did, because I'm going to tell you what happens next and how this all connects. Now at that 24-hour mark, the Landrys, along with Francesca, decide it's time to make that official missing persons report, because they had to wait that designated time frame. We've all heard this. So on Monday evening, the 11th, they still kind of gave them the same song and dance at the Roseville Police Department that Chesterfield did. But thankfully, there was one detective, Scott Blackwell. He was overhearing everything that was going on, and when they were done speaking with an officer, Detective Blackwell wanted to talk to Doreen. She was the one who went out of her way to get all the records, Matt's debit card transactions at the gas station on 7 Mile Road in Detroit. She told him that Matt used his debit card at Quiznos Subs in East Point at 2:33 p.m. That was the very last transaction before all of the strange withdrawals. The Quiznos made sense to Doreen because it's somewhere that he would eat frequently and it was close by. But the other transactions made an hour later, all the way in Detroit, were not normal. I mean, all of Matt's money had been withdrawn from his account. And even though his parents were hoping it was him who made these transactions, it really just did not make sense. So Detective Blackwell saw the red flags go up, and he was interested in this case. He told them that he would do whatever he could to try to figure out what was going on. Detective Blackwell flagged Matt's green Honda as a wanted vehicle on the Law Enforcement Information Network. Then he went to the Sunoco gas station because he wanted to find out if they had video surveillance cameras that would help him right away. Because if Matt was on video, it would ease his parents' minds. Maybe he did leave town, but if it was someone else on those videos, then they needed to look into this further. Detective Blackwell got to the gas station and began talking with the owner, Moses Rahim. Detective Blackwell requested to view the CCTV footage from the security system shortly before 3:30 p.m. on Sunday, August 9th, when Matt's debit card transactions occurred. It was actually pure luck that Moses Rahim was able to help. If they had needed footage of that ATM area just 3 days before this happened, there wouldn't be any. He told Detective Blackwell he was lucky because only 3 days ago, Moses had gone to Sam's Club specifically to buy a high-end security camera to capture a blind spot that his old camera didn't catch, right where the ATM was. For some reason, Moses was not only compelled to buy a new system to include that spot, but he also felt the urge to set it up immediately. It was the weekend when he purchased it, and Moses' son, Isa, tried to convince him that they didn't need to install the camera. He suggested, "Let's do it on Monday." However, Moses was adamant that they replace the system that day. And thankfully they did, because what they captured on video took Matt's case in a totally different direction. Although Detective Blackwell felt lucky to have found this footage, watching it gave him a really bad feeling at 3:30 p.m., about an hour after Matt's card had been used at the Quiznos subs. Moses Rahim's state-of-the-art Sam's Club security camera captured someone other than Matt using Matt's debit card at the gas station. And while Detective Blackwell dreaded having to tell Doreen and Bob Landry what he had just seen, he didn't hesitate to call them and let them know it was not their son on that video. The Landrys were really hoping there would be a reasonable explanation for why Matt wasn't in contact with them. They were even hoping that the police were right, that maybe he was high or drunk and passed out somewhere. But Detective Blackwell had evidence that pointed to something way more sinister. And I'm going to get back to that and everything else that was on that video, because Blackwell had to wait to get a copy of it. By the next day, on Tuesday, August 12th, the family was passing out flyers with Matt's photo and all of his information on it. They even checked auto repair stores, thinking that maybe his car was broken down, as he attempted to buy items to fix it. Francesca had resorted to checking dumpsters, and it's sad, but she was so desperate to find out what happened to the man she loved. She was driving from Roseville south into Detroit, checking along every major road in any store or restaurant that had dumpsters behind them. And as Francesca dug through trash, she could not believe that this is what her life had become. Francesca and Matt were watching movies and making plans for their future just a few days before this, and now he was missing, and she was searching through the garbage for his dead body, which was unreal. And what happens next was also some kind of luck, or maybe the fact that both the police and Matt's loved ones were both retracing his assumed steps. But Francesca saw a lot of police activity right when she was about to make it into Detroit and closer to 7 Mile Road. She saw cop cars just whizzing past her with their sirens blaring, and she decided to follow them. It was in this approximate area, Rossini Drive, and obviously the police had found something big. Francesca hoped it wasn't Matt's body, and as she got closer, she didn't see Matt, but she did see something familiar. It was Matt's green Honda Accord. It was abandoned on the side of the road on Rossini Drive and Hayes Street. It was around 4 miles away from 7 Mile Road, and only 2 minutes from the Sunoco gas station where those ATM transactions were made. Francesca knew it was Matt's car right away, so she got out of her car and made her way over to the police officers. She was so determined and brave, and she was able to explain everything, who she was, and even able to put one of the officers on the phone with Matt's mom. And that's huge. And I'm going to tell you right now, Matt's loved ones were pivotal in solving this case. Some may argue they did more than the police so far. Matt's mom was the one pulling the bank statements and locating the gas station where suspicious transactions took place. And Francesca had her boots on the ground from Roseville into Detroit, looking for her boyfriend. She's now able to connect this officer to Matt's mom, Doreen. And he provides a clue. He tells her there are maps inside Matt's car in the passenger seat. At first, This wasn't something that seemed out of place. Matt was a pizza delivery driver. Doreen said it would not have been uncommon for him to use maps to make sure he found the correct locations. But then, I thought back to 2009. I'm pretty sure we had maps on our iPhones. However, when I Googled it, it turns out iPhones didn't have Apple Maps until 2012. However, they did have Google Maps, but I don't recall the accuracy of them. Could there be another reason for these maps to be in Matt's car? Matt delivered pizza locally, so unless he was trying to make his way well out of town, maybe it would be odd for him to have maps. The police towed the car to a garage at the Chesterfield Township Police Department for processing. By that night, Matt's face and story were all over the local news stations, along with Sarah Menard's hair-raising brush with death at the Flagstar Bank. And watching the news that night was one of the investigators from the Roseville Police Department, Lieutenant Raymond Blarick. Now, this news report of the bank robbery showcased that horrific footage from the CCTV camera, including the robber with the sunglasses on and poor Sarah in his grasp. This case had nothing to do with the Roselle PD for now anyway, since it happened in Harrison Township. But it was shocking to him as a mere citizen of the area, and he was glued to the screen, taking in every detail. And good thing he was, because by the next day, he would be using that news segment to somehow connect the dots to form conclusions in Matt's case. Someone else from Matt's inner circle had become aware of the evidence in this case. It was Matt's dad's best friend, Christopher Manning. Hearing that his best friend's 21-year-old son had vanished, he was not just going to sit around and do nothing. Someone had to stay at the Landrys in case Matt called or came home. So Christopher took it upon himself to play detective. By 7 p.m., Chris and his brother were driving out to the location where Matt's car was found. These men were so brave. This area was residential in nature. Here it is on Google Maps. I'll give you an idea of where this took place. Keep in mind this is only 2 minutes away from 7 Mile Road. This is what the area looked like for the most part, and if you keep making your way down Hayes, you'll run into 7 Mile Road and the Sunoco gas station right here. Chris and his brother searched that area for about 90 minutes before they made their way up to that Sunoco gas station. Remember, the family had not seen the video because Detective Blackwell had to wait to get an official copy that he could retain as evidence. Then he planned to show them. Well, Christopher Manning was determined to see what was on the tape, and somehow they were able to convince Moses Rahim to show them the video. And he did. Here's what they saw. A guy in a white shirt with an orange baseball cap using the ATM. At one point, he turns and faces the camera, and that's when something unexpected happened. One of the cashiers that was working that night was watching the news and had just seen that bank robbery segment. Then he caught a glimpse of the guy on the ATM video. If Chris and his brother hadn't even come in there that night to watch it at that very moment, the cashier might not have seen this video. While he meets the connection between the guy in the bank video and the one on the ATM footage, he says, that is the same guy. And sure enough, Chris and his brother agreed. Not only that, this cashier gave them a name. He said this was a local guy who came in all the time, and he went by the name IHOP. He thought he might even be a gang member and told them that's pretty much all he knew. But that was a lot. It seemed like they were moving faster than the police at this point. On that same footage, they watched this guy purchase a white t-shirt, then take off his shirt and put the new one on. He walked out of the gas station and threw the shirt away in the dumpster on site. The cashier said this was the first time he had ever seen IHOP use an ATM. He always paid in cash, never with a card. So Chris immediately walks out. He goes to that trash, and he's astonished to find that the shirt was still inside. He collects it, and he and his brother go off to canvass the surrounding area, hoping to find Matt or more clues to his disappearance. Why stop now, right? They were on a roll. But it's dark, and these brothers didn't let that scare them. They went up and down 7 Mile Road into abandoned and burned-out houses, trying to see what they could find. Armed with only a flashlight and their sheer determination, they were even stopped by some of the locals, asking them, "What are you doing here?" They confidently told them they were working on a case involving the disappearance of a young man. The person left them alone, thinking they were actual police officers. That's the air they had about them, and maybe they were pretending to be officers. I'm not sure, but all I know is nobody bothered them after that. They kept at it until around 10:30 p.m., and then they made their way back to the Roseville Police Department to hand over the t-shirt they found. The next day, back at the same department, Lieutenant Raymond Blarick is starting his day. Now, he's the one I told you about who was watching the news with the bank robbery, and he was just a concerned citizen at the time. He didn't know that the next day he would be thrown into that very case. A call came in from a man who had just been carjacked at a Walmart parking lot on 12 Mile Road. Lieutenant Blarick was one of the people called out to the scene. The responding officers didn't see the suspect when they arrived in that Walmart parking lot, but the victim and his car, a red Honda Civic, were still there. The victim said a man came up to him as he was getting into his car after shopping. The guy took out a gun and told him to get out of the car and run. So he did what he was told, but to his surprise, he looked back and the gunman was not pulling away. He didn't know why, but he realized it was because the guy didn't know how to drive manual transmission. But there is a learning curve, and this guy never learned. He certainly didn't have time during a carjacking in broad daylight, so he fled on foot. But by that time, the owner of the Civic had already started calling 911. Well, guess what? One of the officers saw someone who looked nervous running through that parking lot, and as the person was running, a wig flew off of their head. Well, that was definitely something that piqued their interest, so they chased after him. As they got closer, the man threw a gun and a clip from out of his pocket, so police didn't even hesitate at this point. They tased the guy. Now he's under arrest, and Blarick gets a good look at him. He realizes this is the same man that he saw on that CCTV footage from the bank robbery. His name is Ihab Musalmani, but he goes by the street name IHOP. Blarick begins putting clues together, one being the green Honda that was found not too far from the Walmart the day before. Both were Hondas and involved in some type of crime. He wants to find out more, so he calls over to the Chesterfield Township Police Department. He's informed about the maps inside. Upon further inspection, a direct link is found. A literal X marks the spot. The map had an X on it, where the Flagstar Bank is located. He begins to think these incidents are all connected. Now he truly believes the carjacker from the Walmart may also have stolen Matt's car and perhaps harmed Matt or taken him somewhere. Sometimes, when these carjackings occur, the occupants are still in their vehicles. Armed with this new information, Blarick and another detective do exactly what Chris and his brother were doing the night before. They started canvassing the area where Matt's car had been found. They were hoping that Matt was still alive and being held somewhere against his will. But with 3 days having passed, the chances of Matt still being unharmed or alive were slim. That night, the Landrys are watching the news and they find out that the guy they know as IHOP from the ATM video has been arrested in connection with the Walmart carjacking. So, Doreen calls the Roseville Police Department and says, "The man who robbed the bank and is in your jail is the same man who used my son's ATM card, and my son is missing. You need to get someone in there to talk to him now." And again, Matt's family, they're the ones putting the heat on police and piecing all these things together. I can't even begin to imagine what it must have felt like for Matt's family. It's like all the signs were pointing to this guy, and yet it must seem like nothing was happening. You probably feel very helpless. Doreen was terrified because she saw that man holding a gun to Sarah in the bank, and she knew how dangerous he was. To think that this man somehow got a hold of her son's bank card, there were so many terrifying thoughts going through her mind. She shared all this with detectives. Meanwhile, Francesca and Gina, Matt's sister, are on the news pleading for someone to do something. They're also making a plea to the perpetrator saying, "Please, just bring Matt back." Gina even made a public post on Facebook telling local people to go down to the Roseville Police Department and put pressure on them to do something. To her surprise, a bunch of people did just that. They even showed up at midnight to support the Landrys. By the next day, Bob and Doreen went down there themselves to talk to detectives. What they didn't know was that the night before, after Blarick returned from searching those burned-out houses late into the night and early morning, he and his partner were already interviewing IHOP. Blarek's partner did all the talking at first, asking questions, hoping IHOP would confess to something in regard to Matt's case, but he was silent. Then, Blarek used a trick. He took a picture of Matt and put it in front of IHOP, saying, "We found him." Now, he was lying, but Blarek wanted to analyze this man's reaction. He saw a look of shock come over his face, as though he had just seen a ghost, but he still remained silent. After some more questions, IHOP, whose real name is Ehab, did begin to speak, but all he said was, "I got no answer for that," and he said it at least a half a dozen times. At one point during the interview, he actually compared himself to Jesus, saying that they were going to find out the truth at the end. He claimed people didn't find out the truth about Jesus until the end, and that he would go to court to fight his case. But his coldness and heartlessness were apparent. He didn't have to speak any words for the detectives to feel that, just from his presence. Blarek relayed all of this information to the Landrys, and they were happy. They were happy that officers seemed to finally be taking their son's case seriously. There was nothing they could do but go back home and wait. Meanwhile, Gina was trying to keep people informed about Matt's story through Facebook. She gets a call from her best friend, and her friend says, "Gina, you better check your Facebook, ASAP." There was a message that came in from a woman that Gina used to go to high school with. The woman told her that her parents had called 911 on Sunday afternoon because they witnessed a carjacking, and it involved an older model green Honda. I was blown away by Matt's family being the ones piecing a lot of this evidence together. This happened in the city of East Point, which was just 4 minutes away from Roseville, where Matt was when he was last seen at Francesca's place, and where the Quiznos was. But it was where the carjacking occurred that made Gina's stomach turn. It happened behind the Quiznos, where Matt's debit card had been used last. This wasn't looking good. Gina immediately told Doreen, and they contacted Blarek with all this new information. Sure enough, a 911 call from that afternoon was found.
911, it's my place. Back of Quiznos, I'm not sure, but it looks like a robbery. You got a guy cornered over here. Somebody neck now. I think he's putting him in the trunk. They're beating him up now. Hurry!
They were actually listening to the voice of Lawrence Wada, who was literally giving the dispatcher a play-by-play of what was happening right in front of his eyes. But by the time the police arrived that afternoon, the car was gone and Matt was nowhere to be found. Here's what Detective Blarek was able to ascertain from the information provided by Lawrence. He was driving his GMC Suburban eastbound on 10 Mile Road with his wife and daughter. As he approached the Quiznos, he saw someone he described as a black male about 35 feet away, standing around the back of the store and kind of tucking something under his waist belt. The traffic began to move forward, and Lawrence drove closer to Quiznos to get a better look. Lawrence then told his wife, "I think that guy has a gun. Lock the doors." Lawrence could see two other males standing by the guy who looked like he had a gun. Lawrence saw a dark-haired white male with his hand draped over another white male who was standing near the green Honda. The vehicle's trunk was open, and they were facing the trunk lid. Lawrence said the black male stood about 10 to 15 feet away and continued to look up and down the streets. Lawrence turned into the parking lot of a store directly across from Quiznos and informed his wife that he was going to warn the Quiznos employees about the man behind their store with a gun. He was probably going to rob the store. However, as Lawrence, very brave by the way, got out to do just that, the man with the gun looked around and made direct eye contact with him. So Lawrence immediately headed back to his car and moved it to another parking lot across from Quiznos. Still, that's when he made the 911 call, telling them there was a man with a gun who looked like he might be robbing Quiznos. At that point, there were still 3 guys on the scene. One was inside the driver's side of a green Honda with his legs out of the door and the door open. The dark-haired white male had his hand over the top of the driver's door and one hand on the top of the roof, sort of blocking the driver inside. Blarek was almost positive that the driver was Matt Landry and that the guy with the dark hair was IHOP. They weren't sure about the third male at this point. But Lawrence went on to explain that the trunk was closed at this time. However, as you heard on the call, the man believed to be IHOP walked around to the trunk, opened it, and grabbed Matt by the neck. He put him in a headlock and attempted to drag him into that trunk. That was a really fit guy. I'm talking six-pack abs or more. He obviously worked out. It wasn't just from his constant and impressive 200 beats per minute heavy metal music on the drums. He looked like he worked out. IHOP was unable to get Matt into the trunk, so he punched him and then tried forcing him into the driver's seat. And at this point, Lawrence was on the phone with 911, saying they're beating someone up. He said that all three men were inside the car, and then it sped off with a man matching IHOP's description at the wheel. Lawrence didn't just stay there. He followed the green Honda for several streets and a few turns before he lost sight of it. He kept relaying all of this information to the dispatcher as this played out. But I realized this was happening very fast, within just minutes. And that is why police did not find the car when they arrived. After gathering this new information, detectives went over to Quiznos to interview the staff that were working on Sunday, August 9th, 2009. Michael Sawyer was an assistant manager that day, and he was working with his coworker Jessica McKinney. They were both questioned about what they remembered from that day in regard to Matt Landry. Right away, Jessica let detectives know she knew Matt personally. She also took his order that day. But before Matt came in, there was an encounter with two other men that stood out. Michael said that before the men entered Quiznos, he saw them across the street in the plaza riding their bikes. A man he described as Arab American, wearing an orange baseball cap, who we know is most likely IHOP at this point, came in and asked if he could have a cup of water, which Jessica ended up helping him get. After he got the drink, he left the store with it. Shortly afterward, a young African American male walked into the store, carrying the same cup, and asked for some water. Jessica showed him where to fill up his cup. After this, Jessica said Matt came into the store and she began to take his order. He specifically mentioned that his girlfriend wasn't feeling well, and he asked if Jessica knew any kind of sub or food that would make her feel better or would be easy for her to keep down if she was feeling sick to her stomach. He cared so much. He was so proud to have a girlfriend. It's like you want to tell everyone that you meet that you love someone or that you're loved by someone. I get it, and it hurts me to think about Matt doing this right before he's confronted by these two men. But Jessica proceeded to make 2 subs for Matt. He paid, and then he left. Michael said that about 10 minutes later, the East Point police officers arrived at that store, responding to a 911 call. After interviewing the workers at Quiznos, detectives made their way to the surrounding businesses, asking to view their security footage. They got a hit. A Marathon gas station near Quiznos said they had a camera, so they pulled the surveillance footage. Detectives combed through it, and sure enough, at 5 p.m. on Sunday, August 9th, 2009, they spotted the green Honda pull in. Now they already knew that IHOP was seen at 3:30 that day at the Sunoco, so this footage was after the ATM transactions. I'm so sick of calling him IHOP, I don't know why, so I'm going to call him IHAB, because that's his name. Ehab was seen on this new surveillance, pulling Matt's green Honda into the convenience store parking lot. He got out of the vehicle and entered the store. 2 females were inside the vehicle, but no Matt inside the store. Ehab and another guy appeared to be conducting some kind of transaction. Ehab looks as though he has a pistol concealed in his waistband. 20 minutes earlier, their surveillance video shows an unidentified black male subject at the same gas station wearing the same orange baseball hat that IHOB was wearing when he was speaking to the unidentified individual. So all this is starting to make sense, especially to Francesca once she gets the news. Matt had asked her if she wanted anything to eat before he left, and considering he got 2 subs, she knew that he had thoughtfully gotten her one, even though she declined his offer. Another thing is, she had a dream before Matt went missing that he was taken and dragged into the basement of someone's house, tied up to one of those vintage heaters. Now, she was beginning to wonder if that dream was actually a premonition. Matt's family was still hoping that he's alive. Maybe he's tied up somewhere, maybe he's being kept against his will, maybe he's at a crack house somewhere on 7 Mile Road. But they just hoped he was okay. 5 days had gone by, and finally, a task force was put together to go search those exact locations. All the departments came together: Chesterfield, Roseville, the East Point Department, in addition to the Detroit Police Department's gang unit, and Dearborn, Michigan, provided canines to this task force. They were on a mission to find Matt. Now, there are hundreds of these burned-out houses in Detroit at this time. Many residents would beg the mayor to do something about this, to demolish them so they wouldn't attract vagrants, drug dealers, and crime. It was Thursday, August 13th. Lieutenant Blarick and his partner, Lieutenant James Noblesdorf, entered an abandoned, burned-down home on Madeline Street, near Monarch Street, just 1 block north of 7 Mile Road. This was 2 blocks away from their Humes family Sunoco gas station. This is the street they were on. It's a rough area. They had been confronted by drug dealers all day and users. They were trying to get information about Matt and whether anyone had seen him or knew a guy named IHOP. It was there, on the street, that Blarick had just found a shiny penny, heads up, outside the last house that they had just come out of. He felt like his luck was about to change. He had made a promise to Matt's family, as a father himself, that he would not stop until he found Matt. So he and his partner entered the house at 14711 Madeline Street. If you can even call this a house, because this structure didn't even have any walls that were completely standing up. The walls were just burned through. It was just a ton of debris, and only the metal frame was there. There was garbage just strewn around the lawn. It was set way back from the street, and it looked like it could come crashing down at any minute. Yet these men did not hesitate to venture inside. Look at this place. It's completely burned out. But it was what Detective Blarick saw when he stepped inside that made him keep going. Something out of place. A flip-flop in perfect condition. As he made his way deeper inside, that's when he saw what he feared. The body of a white male with the other flip-flop still on. It had only been 5 days, but with the smoldering summer heat, the condition of the body was much more decomposed than usual for such a short time frame. Lieutenant Blarick visually examined the remains and saw what appeared to be a gunshot wound to the head. They preliminarily identified Matt from photos that they had of him. They were certain it was him. He was transported to Wayne County Medical Examiner's office for a full autopsy, and using dental records, a medical examiner confirmed that they had found the body of Matt Landry. The most important thing they had to do right now was to inform the Landrys before the media arrived, because when they radio something like this in, many news stations listen to their radio channels to be the first to cover a story. They sent the chief of police to Matt's family's home, and as soon as Doreen saw him at the door, she already knew the news that she was going to get. She didn't even want to hear it. But after she got the news and she finished crying, she said she went straight into the shower because she just wanted to feel like she was washing away this horrific reality. Dr. Lockman Sung, an assistant medical examiner in Wayne County, performed the autopsy on Matt. The manner of death was a homicide. The cause of death, gunshot wound to the back of the head with a slightly downward trajectory. The exit wound was to the front. Ihab Musulmani was only 17 years old when he was arrested and now charged with the murder of Matt Landry. He was from Libya. He was brought over to America at 10 years old and was living with relatives, but unfortunately he suffered from neglect and he was put in the custody of the state. After being tossed around to different foster homes, he finally ran away and began living on the streets, ultimately getting involved with gangs, selling drugs, and using crack cocaine, among other illegal substances. He resorted to a life of crime to satisfy his addiction. It's a sad story, but an even sadder one for the man that he was accused of killing, poor Matt Landry. Ihab pleaded not guilty to all the crimes, that bank robbery, attempted murder, and the murder of Matt, among other things. Now the thing is, it was pretty obvious that Ihab had done this. He had been seen on the bank cameras driving Matt's car on surveillance videos at the ATM, so those crimes were more of a slam dunk. However, there was no evidence linking him to Matt's murder, no gun, no bullets at the scene. However, there were 2 spent cartridges found, one near Matt's body and the other a few houses down in a driveway. But without anything to compare them to, they couldn't concretely connect him to Matt's murder. They needed more. They also weren't convinced he acted alone, since the eyewitnesses from Quiznos, both Lawrence, who made the 911 call, as well as the staff, said there were 2 males with Matt. They needed to track down the other one. I know this is a lot of information, but I want you to know the details. I want you to know who was responsible for this. And according to Matt's friends, 2 people had to be involved. Although Matt was considered a gentle giant, he could take down anyone, and he would easily have beaten a single attacker. But 2, that would be a little more difficult. One of his bandmates was the one who said this. He was 6 feet tall and 280 pounds, and he said confidently that Matt could lay him out. Detectives started to canvass the area again, asking if anyone knew of a black male who hung out with Ihab, and sure enough, they got a name, Fat Daddy, aka Robert Taylor, a 16-year-old whose last known address was 15887 Madeline Street, the same street where Matt's body was found. They went there, but they couldn't find him. So on August 20th, they released a photo, here it is, to the media. By August 24th, he turned himself in. The first thing he said, without even being prompted, was, "I did not kill that man," referring to Matt. When he was finally taken into custody for an interrogation, he waived his Miranda rights and told detectives his version of events, starting with the Quiznos situation. Robert said he was just the lookout. He also stated that Matt went with him and Ihab voluntarily, but we know that's not true. Plus, an orange hat was found in Matt's car. When they analyzed it, it had Robert's DNA on it, linking him to being in Matt's car and an accomplice of Ihab's. According to Robert, he and Ihab were looking for a vehicle to steal that day. They rode their bikes to East Point from Detroit and did not want to ride them back because it would take too long. So that's why they wanted to steal a car. Robert Taylor described how he looked out while Ihab forced Matt into the vehicle. Then he showed Matt his gun as they drove away and threatened him. And that's all Robert Taylor would say. He said he's not guilty and stopped speaking. So now detectives go back to the streets, interviewing people in the area where Matt's body was found. They get a big break in the case from a man named Frederick Singleton. He was a crack addict who frequented the area of Madeline and Monarch, and he was able to fill in the gaps about what happened to Matt that Sunday evening. He knew both IHOP and Fat Daddy, Ihab, and Robert Taylor. Fred said it was 10 p.m. and he was outside a crack house in the area when he saw both of the men he knew as Ihab and Fat Daddy. Fat Daddy was driving and Ihab was in the back with Matt. Ihab asked Fred if he had any drugs, and he said no, but "I can get you some." All 3 of them got out of the Honda and went into the drug house. There were 2 women already inside doing drugs. At this point, Ihab gave Fred $100, and he left to go about a block away to get them some crack. He said he was only gone a few minutes. He brought back the drugs, and then Ihab, Fred, and the 2 ladies smoked crack while Robert and Matt sat on the couch. Fred looked over at Matt, who looked really out of place, and he asked him if he wanted some drugs. That's when Ihab interrupted, saying, "Don't worry about him, he's with me." Then Ihab pulled out more crack and Fred, the 2 ladies, and he smoked yet again. Fred told detectives that he left the house around 11 p.m. and he saw 2 guys handing Ihab a gas can. This was all they had to go on, since Robert was done talking and pleaded not guilty to the murder. The trial for both Ihab and Robert was set for September 2010. Meanwhile, remember Christopher Manning, Matt's dad's best friend? Well, months after Matt's death, on April 15th, 2010, Chris, along with some friends, drove back to 14711 Madeline, where Matt's body had been found. They were looking to find a bullet or possibly the gun that killed him. Well, Chris ended up finding a bullet lodged in a wall, so he contacted detectives and they came to retrieve this bullet. Once again, it's Matt's loved ones who are diligently trying to step up to solve this case. The bullet was compared to the firearm found in the Walmart parking lot after that carjacking, but sadly, they were not a match. However, they were about to find out what happened during the trial. Mike Sidori testified for the prosecution. He was an inmate who had been incarcerated with Robert Taylor in maximum security. They came from the same neighborhood, so they connected. Eventually, Robert told Mike the whole story. He said that he and Ihab were hitting licks, which means they were stealing, robbing, or tricking someone out of their vehicle. He told him about beating up Matt and how they all got into the car at Quiznos. In the car, Robert said that Ehab showed Matt a gun and told him what time it was, meaning they were going to kill him. We already know what happened that evening and into the night because we have Fred's story about the crack house. But it's what happened afterward that Mike helped piece together. He said Robert told him that they ultimately took Matt to an abandoned house. Once inside, he punched Matt in the face and then shot him in the back of the head, execution style. Then Robert sold the gun to someone on the streets. Neither Robert nor Ehab showed any remorse or shame during the trial. The two men were found guilty of murder in the first degree, kidnapping, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, carjacking, and a slew of other charges. Matt's mom talked to the media outside the courthouse, and she said that she was relieved with the verdict. However, just 2 years later, the Supreme Court ruled in 2012 that sentencing minors to a life term without parole was unconstitutional. As a result of the Supreme Court ruling, Robert and Ehab challenged their sentences. Ehab's defense attorney used his painful childhood as a reason to overturn his sentence. It's sad because they ended up having to do a resentencing hearing, and even more heinous details emerged, which Matt's family had to sit through yet again. Thankfully, neither man had been successful in any of their appeals. However, Ehab appealed again after the resentencing hearing, and it wasn't until 2016 that the court ruled against him. But sadly, that's also the year Matt's father passed away at only 64 years old. I read that in 2021, just a year ago, Ehab had tried once again to appeal his conviction, and thankfully the courts denied him again. I like to end on something positive, if possible. Matt Landry's family and friends miss him every day. When his bandmates play together or hold an instrument, they feel his presence. One thing Doreen wanted more than anything was for the homes in that Detroit area to be demolished. She begged the mayor, saying that nothing good came from that place. She pleaded with the mayor to do something about it. In 2010, the mayor started a program to do just that, and the house that Matt was killed in was demolished. I wanted to end with this. Even though Matt was a gifted drummer, his mother, Doreen, told Dateline that he was also a talented acoustic guitarist. He would practice Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven for her in his spare time. She said she would do anything to hear him strum his guitar chords again. She said that they planned to go to the Detroit Symphony before he was taken from her. Doreen and Bob wanted everyone at Matt's funeral to remember his smile and the joy that he brought to them. They wanted Matt to be celebrated for who he was. So the couple approached their priest with a very unusual request during Matt's funeral. Doreen hoped a music group or someone would be willing to perform Stairway to Heaven in the church. The priest promised that he would see what he could do and acquired a number of talented singers to sing Led Zeppelin's classic in honor of Matt's memory. The song was a fitting choice for a rock star boy who scaled the symbolic staircase well before his time. Imagine experiencing a sense of dread. I believe we can all recall a moment when something felt off. Some might refer to it as a premonition, while others might call it intuition or a gut instinct. Some may even view it as a divine message from God. In today's case, however, the woman foresaw her own murder just hours before it occurred. She confided in her loved ones that she had an ominous feeling that someone intended to take her life, and then it came true. This is one of those narratives that sends a shiver down your spine and prompts you to reevaluate everything and everyone around you. Let me start by introducing you to Valerie Reyes. She was born on April 9, 1994 in New Rochelle, New York, to her parents, S. Reyes and Norma Sanchez. She was one of 4 kids. She had an older brother and 2 younger brothers, the youngest of whom came along when Valerie was 17 and 19. But despite their age gap, Valerie was super close with her younger brothers, and she absolutely adored her older one. Being the only daughter, she was definitely her parents' little princess. New Rochelle is a vibrant and diverse suburb in Westchester County, New York, right by the Long Island Sound. Valerie grew up in a safe, quiet neighborhood where families had known each other for years. Her parents worked hard to give their kids a stable home environment, teaching them the importance of family, education, and working hard to make a better life. Valerie's family had strong Mexican roots, and their closeness and support for one another were at the heart of everything they did. Valerie fit right into this close-knit family, always prioritizing the ones that she loved. Growing up, Valerie enjoyed painting, loved animals, and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian one day. When she was just 6 years old, the Journal News did an article on school diversity and featured Valerie. Even at the young age of 6, she showed her compassionate nature by helping her classmates with their Spanish. She said, "It's fun for me to teach them, like a teacher." That compassionate and selfless spirit was something that stuck with her throughout her life. Valerie went to New Rochelle High School, where she met her best friend, Jeffrey Anderson. They met when they were both 14, forming a bond that lasted well into their adult years. At school, Valerie quickly became known for her kind heart and her genuine care for others. She had this incredible ability to sense when something was wrong with someone, call it intuition, and she would always offer help at the right moment. She approached everything with warmth and empathy, making her incredibly approachable, even to people she didn't know. Valerie grew into a beautiful young woman with a bright smile, striking brown eyes, and a quiet, friendly nature. She wasn't the type to seek the spotlight, but she was a very talented person. Valerie also found joy in simple things, like hanging out with friends and family. Even though her little brothers could get on her nerves, she was also serious about her studies and was involved in plenty of after-school activities. Though friendly, her friends described her as more reserved, preferring smaller, intimate gatherings over big social events. Valerie's sweet and gentle nature matched her interests perfectly. Painting, reading, and writing are things you usually do by yourself in a quiet place, and she had a passion for spending time doing these things outdoors. She was the kind of person who loved deeply, always there for anyone who needed her. She was the type who would drop everything at a moment's notice to help someone she cared about. Her mom, Norma, often talked about Valerie's huge heart and how she was the kind of daughter every parent dreamed of, caring, loyal, and full of love. When Valerie graduated high school in 2012, she wasn't quite sure what she wanted to do with her life. College didn't seem to appeal to her at the time. It felt a little too restrictive for someone as free-spirited as she was. All she knew was that whatever she did, she wanted to use her creative talents. Her older brother was a tattoo artist, and she looked up to him so much that she began considering following in his footsteps. Valerie was an incredibly talented artist herself. She could draw spot-on portraits and would do this for her friends, family, and anyone she cared about. She even let her brother tattoo her arm, allowing him to practice his craft on her body, which alone shows how much she trusted and respected him. Valerie was also passionate about reading and could lose herself in a good book for hours. Her best friend Jeffrey would say that Valerie was a homebody at heart. She loved going to coffee shops with a book in hand or spending quiet nights sketching. Valerie was also a talented singer, though not many people knew about that since she kept many things very private. She wasn't one to boast, but she would open up to those she felt close to. Most of her closest friends were family members, like her cousins, aunts, and her maternal grandparents, Jose and Graciela Sanchez. They lived nearby, and Valerie loved spending time with them, often dropping by without notice, which was always a pleasant surprise. Of everyone in her life, her bond with her mom, Norma, was the strongest. Norma had Valerie when she was just 21, and as the only women in the household, they developed an unbreakable bond. Norma saw Valerie not just as her daughter, but as her best friend. Even after Valerie moved out and started living on her own, she would talk to her mom every single day. Sundays were always reserved for family time, which became Valerie's favorite day of the week, as it meant gathering at her parents' house with her older and younger brothers. They'd all catch up on each other's lives. Norma said her kids always looked forward to Sundays. Valerie would play board games and hide and seek with her younger brothers, sharing fun and silly moments together. Sometimes they'd grab a bite to eat, other times they'd go to the park. They'd do anything really, as long as they were with family. Those moments together meant everything to Valerie. Valerie worked hard to enjoy the things that mattered most to her. She was good at saving money, living by her mother's motto, "When you're at work, you do work." Her friends said that she had the soul of an artist, but the work ethic of a CEO. One of her first jobs after high school was at the local Costco, where she met Shell Ellis. This coworker quickly became a close friend. Shell admired Valerie's humility, noting that while Valerie was incredibly talented, she never craved attention for it. They clicked instantly. Shell said Valerie would draw freestyle while Shell cooked, and Shell had the honor of being one of Valerie's portrait subjects. Shell saw just how gifted Valerie truly was and was ecstatic when Valerie's brother got her a dummy arm to practice tattooing on. Shell could tell Valerie was thrilled to help him pursue his dream, while honing her own tattooing skills. As well, by the time she turned 21, Valerie had moved into the basement apartment at 34 Colonial Place in New Rel, staying close to her parents because she only lived 3 or 4 minutes away. It wasn't long before Valerie saw that a new bookstore, the Barnes & Noble, was opening soon, and it was only 15 minutes away in East Chester. She loved books. We know that she always carried them around with her, and she was looking for something new to dive into all the time. So when she saw this job being advertised at the bookstore, she applied right away and joined the very first team of employees when it opened for its grand opening. This included Lauren Bradford, who was 5 years younger than her. Valerie made quite an impression on Lauren, who was only a teenager at the time. In the 10 months that they worked together, before Lauren went off to college, Valerie shared her passion for art with her and her dreams of becoming a tattoo artist. Lauren remembered Valerie as a confidant, someone that you could really go to if you needed advice, and she encouraged Lauren to go after all of her aspirations. Lauren knew this was solid advice because it was obvious that Valerie had a good head on her shoulders and a very bright future ahead of her. She encouraged a lot of her friends to follow their dreams, including Michael Follow, who said if it wasn't for Valerie, he wouldn't have learned digital art. She saw his sketches, and she persuaded him to get an iPad and an Apple Pen and just to create. But behind Valerie's bright smile and her encouraging and compassionate nature, there were things that people didn't always see, a skeleton in the closet, so to speak. She struggled with bouts of depression and anxiety, something that many creative souls can actually relate to. Valerie often used art as a way to escape during those darker times. She was the type to retreat into her own world, surrounding herself with paintbrushes and pencils whenever life felt overwhelming. Valerie also found peace in nature, especially on long walks around Beachmont Lake. It was a beautiful area, perfect for sitting by the water on a bench under the trees and just watching the ducks swim by while listening to the water from the fountain hit the lake surface. It's really pretty in the winter as well, with all the snow and ice. Valerie would spend hours just sketching or soaking in the quiet calm. For her, it was the perfect way to reset. You can tell that Valerie's life was simple yet filled with love, laughter, and a strong sense of purpose. Reading and art were her escapes, a way to express herself without saying words or to find an expression for how she was feeling in someone else's words. As much as Valerie enjoyed the slower pace, she was also quite the hard worker. She worked as much as she could. Her boss and colleagues described her as someone who was always punctual, dependable, and respected. She was known to have a ferocious work ethic, and her customers adored her as well. They often commented on her friendly smile and her willingness to go the extra mile to help them find the perfect book. As a neighbor, Valerie kind of kept to herself for the most part, but she would still say hello when she saw her neighbors on Colonial Place. However, one of those neighbors ended up becoming a friend. Brenda DJ, a mother of 5, used to say hi to Valerie every now and then when she would see her come and go during the week. But when Valerie brought a new puppy home, all the neighborhood kids just rushed over and wanted to see it, and that instantly made Valerie very popular on their block. Valerie and Brenda also bonded when Valerie noticed Brenda's tattoos, and she mentioned that her brother was actually a tattoo artist. After that, they began talking more and more, and every morning they would have a conversation about whatever was going on in their lives. Valerie would often inquire about Brenda's children. If she didn't see one of her kids for a couple of days, she would say, "Oh, are they okay?" Which Brenda thought was a really sweet gesture. While Valerie was naturally quiet and reserved, she actually wasn't a stranger to love and relationships. She was a very beautiful woman who attracted a lot of attention, especially from men, and she dated on and off, like many people her age. She was always very giving in relationships, and sometimes to a fault. She would often put the needs of her partner before her own, which nearly always led to heartbreak. Valerie's mom, Norma, recalls that she could be too trusting at times, and that she believed there was goodness in everyone. She always wanted to see the best in everyone, but these aren't bad things. However, they are things that could easily make you vulnerable and easy to take advantage of. As Valerie entered her mid-20s, she began to look ahead to the future. She dreamed of things like traveling and exploring new places. She spoke to her friends and her family about wanting to see the world, but her family was worried that she was naive about the dangers that could lie in these unknown places. They, of course, supported anything she felt was right. So, to start off 2019, she decided to take a trip to Alaska, and she really started to spread her wings. But soon tragedy would strike, seemingly out of nowhere, and it would send shockwaves through her extended group of family, friends, and ripple effects extending to her co-workers and her quiet neighborhood. So let's jump to Sunday, January 27th, soon after she returned from her Alaska trip. That day, Valerie, her parents, and her brothers met up for their weekly meal at her parents' house. There was nothing out of the ordinary about that day. Valerie was her normal self. They laughed, played games, and after eating, the kids did all the cleaning to give their parents a break. Valerie had to work the next day on Monday, but she had Tuesday off, so she and her mom made plans to go shopping at Home Depot together. On Monday, January 28, the next day, Valerie went to work as usual, but it was when she came home that something changed. That evening, she texted her mom that she felt nervous. She also texted her best friend, Jeffrey, saying that she felt worried about something she just really couldn't put her finger on. She had a dark feeling looming over her, a sense that something bad was going to happen to her. Of course, Norma was concerned. She wanted to know what this was all about. That's when Valerie called her in a panic. Norma thought it might have something to do with a recent breakup. Just 4 days before this, on January 24th, Valerie had ended a relationship with a guy named Justin Orta, and Norma knew that Valerie had been troubled after the breakup, especially because she was now all alone in her apartment, with Justin no longer being there to keep her company or keep her safe. Norma asked Valerie if her fears had anything to do with Justin, and she said no. She said she just had a lot of panic in her voice. So Norma had asked her to come stay with her, but she said, "No, Mama, I'm okay." However, she wouldn't stop going on and on about how frightened she was to be all alone in her apartment. She said she just could not shake her fear. So Norma pressed her even more. Valerie let her know that there was no one specific she was afraid of, but she was hearing about all these murders of young women, and she couldn't get them out of her head. Then she literally said to her mom, "I feel like somebody's going to murder me." That's very chilling, and of course to her mom, she was so desperate for more information. She was prying and prying, trying to get her daughter to tell her more, but Valerie refused to specify why she felt that way. Maybe she really didn't know why, but Norma kept pressing, asking, "Is there someone at your house?" She said no. She asked again, "Is it your ex-boyfriend Justin?" And she again told her no, it wasn't him. It was just a feeling. Valerie also confided in her mom about having anxiety attacks lately, and that she was becoming scared and paranoid of being alone. Norma knew that Valerie could become anxious here and there, but she was usually a pretty positive person. So, this was very worrying for her mother. For her to be this bent out of shape wasn't normal. Valerie told her she was going to try to go get something to eat and calm down, so she left her apartment to visit a local market just around the corner, where she bought some groceries before returning to her place. Later that night, she did text her mom, "Good night," and she told her she finally ate and that she was feeling better. She also promised she would calm down. Norma was confused about what was going on with her daughter, but she knew she was going to meet up with her the very next day, and they would be able to talk through how she was feeling, and she would get to the bottom of it. At the same time, Valerie had been texting Norma. She had also been texting her best friend Jeff with the same concerns, telling him the same thing, that she thought someone was going to kill her. He wasn't sure what to make of it. Was it just Valerie worrying about something she'd seen on the news regarding crime in the neighborhood, or had someone made an actual threat against her? Valerie never answered that question, but Jeff tried his best to be there for her. By 11:35 that night, she finally said goodnight to Jeff, texting him, "I'm a knockout now. My eyes can't open anymore. LOL." The first sign that something wasn't right was the next day, on Tuesday, January 29th. Norma was now waiting for Valerie to show up at her house. They were going to go on their shopping trip, but she never dropped by. Norma tried reaching out, calling her, and texting her, but Valerie never answered her calls or responded to any of those texts. Norma thought her daughter was probably just tired. She needed some sleep, especially after how overwhelmed she was the night before. So she just let it go and let her be. But Norma wasn't the only one not getting an answer from Valerie. Family members and friends had reached out and never got a response either, which wasn't like Valerie. Still, the alarm bells were not going off yet, since there were times when Valerie liked being alone. It was the next day, on the morning of Wednesday, January 30th, when Valerie didn't show up for her shift at Barnes & Noble, that her co-workers became concerned, and they started reaching out to her family. Norma knew right away that something was wrong. She said, "This isn't Val. We talk all the time, so it's not like her to just not answer her phone." She knew in her heart that something was wrong. She hadn't been seen for 2 days now, and concerns were growing. It was completely out of character for Valerie to suddenly lose contact with her family, and even more unusual for her to miss a day of work without notice. Valerie was always reliable. She took her job very seriously. So, this kind of behavior was alarming, especially since she just told her mom the day before that she was afraid someone might try to kill her. Norma couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly, terribly wrong. All calls to her cell phone went directly to voicemail, suggesting her phone was either off, or it had died, or it was broken. Her mom, dad, and her now ex-boyfriend of under a week wasted no time. The three of them went to the New Rochelle Police Department at 2:43 p.m., filed a missing persons report. Norma relayed to the officers that Valerie was so upset on the night before, on Monday, that she could barely speak, and she thought that someone was going to murder her, and now this. It was too eerie considering that she had gone radio silent. They explained that the last time they physically saw her was on Sunday, and then Norma and Jeff had spoken to her on Monday night, both of them talking her through her fears, with her last text to Jeff going out at 11:35. No one had heard from her since. One of the first steps the police took was to search Valerie's Colonial Place apartment in New Rochelle. There weren't any clear signs of a struggle, but forensic analysis did uncover small traces of blood in several spots. A faint stain on Valerie's pillow, 2 tiny spots on the bathroom floor, and another on the toilet. However, these were so minimal, they didn't provide much information. The police also noted that several of Valerie's belongings were missing, including her iPhone, her iPad, her wallet, and some items of clothing and bedding. While this might suggest that Valerie had left voluntarily, her friends and family were adamant that she would not just disappear without giving any notice, given her recent fears that someone was out to harm her. The police started leaning towards the possibility of foul play and that she was possibly kidnapped. Naturally, one of the first people they looked into was her ex-boyfriend, Justin. This recent breakup could have given him a motive. However, he was quickly ruled out as a suspect and even became very active in the search for Valerie. He handed over his cell phone and his iPad to be analyzed, and her mom and dad gave the police a recent picture of their daughter and information pertinent to being able to put in a missing persons poster. Her family immediately began making copies of the poster and distributing it all around town and on social media. No time was wasted creating a Facebook page to help find Valerie. Her family and friends began posting right away, asking if anyone had seen her. Others were posting hopeful messages. One of her cousins said, "I hope you are okay. I love you." There were also some assumptions and false information posted there as well, as per usual when groups like this are created. One person claimed they were a family member of Valerie's and that she had been last seen on Monday, January 29th, walking to a New Rochelle train station. Now this actually was not true, but it was shared on a bunch of other platforms like X, formerly Twitter, and it only hindered the investigation, but noted the fact that Valerie was a grown woman with the ability to leave on her own. Her parents felt like they weren't going to get the help they really needed from law enforcement. So the family actually hired a private investigator the very next day. This PI thought he had tracked her to a Manhattan ATM around 2 a.m. because he was looking through her transactions, and one of them appeared to come from that location, but he wasn't on the right track. However, this PI continued to look for images of women he thought could be Valerie, and he thought he spotted her at 6 a.m. on Wednesday, January 30th, the day after she was reported missing. Now, to be fair, detectives in New Rochelle that were working on her disappearance showed her mother this photo of the surveillance video of a woman at a Chase Bank branch near Radio City Music Hall, and Norma positively identified the woman on camera as her daughter, Valerie. But it turned out she was mistaken. In these stressful moments, it's really not uncommon for loved ones to make mistaken identifications of images. Most of the time, it's wishful thinking. They want to believe that's their daughter, that's their loved one. But this threw off the search, because now there was a new description sent out to the public stating that Valerie was last seen wearing a green coat, black jeans, and black shoes, and was in Manhattan, New York, when that wasn't even her. But that wasn't known until later, and this is all too common, especially with social media. The false information can spread very quickly with how easily it is to just share something. Most people mean well and are trying to help, but a lot of times, it only makes things worse. Valerie's ex-boyfriend Justin was also posting about her, identifying himself online as her boyfriend, even though they had been broken up before she went missing. I understand that may have been just to make things easy, or maybe not to look suspicious by saying that he was her ex. But either way, he started posting on Twitter the same day they reported her missing, pleading for her return. One post said, "My girlfriend Valerie is now officially reported as missing nationwide by the authorities. Please contact me if there's any kind of information." But when the news outlets reached out to him for comments, he declined interviews. He said that he was too busy cooperating with police to offer any information. He then posted something very cryptic. He said, "What's done in the dark will always find a way to shine." I think that could look a little suspicious, but there wasn't anything to hold him on. The missing persons poster said, "Have you seen Valerie Reyes? 5 feet 3 inches, black hair, brown eyes, half a tattoo on her left arm, and a right forearm tattoo." They had the description of the clothing that was incorrect, but they said she was last seen wearing a green coat, black jeans, and a black pair of shoes. They also let it be known that she suffered from anxiety and depression, which I thought was interesting because I have not seen a poster that explicitly said that on it. This information was also tweeted by the NYPD Midtown North's account. I noticed she also had an eyebrow ring on her right brow and a very distinctive way of lining her eyelids with a cat-eye-shaped black eyeliner. She was sometimes seen wearing glasses. Despite extensive efforts by the police throughout New Rochelle and New York City, they initially had no luck finding any leads. That is, until the morning of February 5th, 8 days after Valerie went missing, when a 911 call came in at 8:23 a.m. A highway worker who was routinely sweeping the streets in that area was calling to report a suspicious red suitcase that they noticed about 15 feet off the side of the road in a wooded area along Glenville Road, just north of Stillman Lane, in the quiet residential town of Greenwich, Connecticut. This was in a whole other state, but the area bordered Westchester County in New York, and it was only a 20-minute drive from Valerie's New Rochelle apartment. The road worker explained that he was in an area he frequented to maintain the roadways, and he immediately noticed the bright-colored suitcase that hadn't been there before. Anytime there's a suitcase somewhere, I think it's natural to wonder what's inside and why it's there. So he stopped and walked down the embankment to investigate further. However, when he got to it, he was a little apprehensive about opening it alone. So he called his boss, James Clifford, the foreman of the Public Works Department, and told him to come out to assist him. When James got there, they began to inspect the suitcase. They unzipped it, only to be met with a very foul smell. Once they peered inside, they were immediately confronted with a gruesome discovery. It appeared to be the body of a deceased woman. Now, I do want to point out that normally, during the warmer months, this area is dense with greenery and brush. But when this was happening, it was in the middle of winter. The trees were bare, the ground was wet with ice and melted snow, and you could see right down to this area where the suitcase was found. It was also a very bright suitcase, against the contrast of the winter's brown and black ground and barren tree branches, making the suitcase very hard to miss. Officers from the Greenwich, Connecticut Police Department were sent out to the scene. This area is home to just under 2,200 people and is considered a pretty small town. Things like this were not expected to happen here, so they quickly blocked off a portion of Glenville Road with police vehicles. No one could use this road unless they had to enter due to living in the area. While the scene was being processed for evidence, death investigators made their way to the suitcase and completely unzipped it, throwing open the top portion and exposing what was inside. That's when it became apparent that the victim was a female, estimated to be between 18 to 30 years old. They couldn't be sure, but they knew that this wasn't a child. She was in the early stages of decomposition, with mottling around her hands and feet. The victim's body was clearly forced into a position that allowed her to be stuffed in the suitcase. Her face had been wrapped with several layers of packing tape. She had shoulder-length black hair, was barefoot, and was wearing an unbuttoned shirt and denim jeans. She was bound at the ankles, the knees, and her hands were bound behind her back with what appeared to be white twine and more packing tape. Most of the tape had been placed over her mouth and chin area, and she had been beaten. There were obvious signs of head trauma, including bruising around the face and a large hematoma on her forehead. It wasn't clear where she had been killed, but it did seem as though this wasn't the location she died. They couldn't tell how her death occurred. They had to wait for the medical examiner to conduct an autopsy. The crime scene technicians combed the entire area for any pieces of evidence they could find, and by noon the body had been transferred to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. Then the Greenwich Police Captain Robert Berry from the Detective Division held a press conference right in front of the location where the body had been found. He did this right in the middle of the closed-off road as reporters from the area came to ask questions. Now I will summarize what he said and want to point out some very important parts to focus on. Hey everyone, again my name is Captain Robert Berry from the Greenwich Police Department, Detective Division. Again, we had a homicide investigation that we're continuing from this morning. This remains an active homicide investigation. We're just about now finishing up processing the scene. Our last detectives and forensic detectives are finishing up as we speak. I do want to confirm the information that was out there a little bit this morning, but the victim was found bound at the hands and at the feet, and the victim was found in a suitcase. The victim has now since been removed from the scene. We have received numerous public tips, which is very appreciated. We are following up on each and every one of them. We do want to encourage the public to continue to call in those tips. Police do have a tip line, that's area code 203-63333. Again, that's 203-63333, and that is an anonymous tip line. We have received some leads on some, I would say, possible identifications of the victim, but at this point nothing is confirmed, so I have no information to release actually identifying the victim. We are following up on some leads. Our focus right now is obtaining the identification of the victim, so that a proper notification can be done to the next of kin. It's always sensitive to us that every time we have a tragedy such as this, there's a family connected to it. We always try to keep that at the forefront of our minds, and our heartfelt thoughts and prayers go out to that family wherever they may be. As you heard, Captain Berry confirmed that the victim had been found inside of a suitcase. She was bound by her hands and feet, and I'm adding what was left out. She was also bound at the knees, or as they would say, she was hogtied. The captain didn't provide all of the details, but he did mention that they had some leads as to her identity, but they wanted to be able to notify the next of kin before just announcing that publicly, out of respect. He reminded everyone that every victim has a family connected to them, and I think that's really important. It does get forgotten sometimes. The captain answers the reporter. The captain explained that due to the temperature being cold, as well as the fact that the suitcase was in a low-lying area, it was even colder than the roadway. So they were dealing with a bit of complexity in those terms, and he told them that they would have to wait for the autopsy. Finally, one more important question was when the reporter asked how big the suitcase was. That's a fair question, considering there was a body found inside of it. The captain said he didn't have the exact dimensions, but for reference, it wasn't small enough to fit in an overhead bin on an airplane, so it was more of full-size luggage. Keep that in mind, because there will be more information about that later. Okay, so that wraps up what we can learn from the first few hours after the body was discovered. Now there was some drone footage and other footage of this area, so I'm going to be playing that for you. The area of this exact location was out of sight from nearby residences. There was a small depression on the east side of Glenville Road, near Stillman Lane, and it would appear that that would be a really convenient place for someone to park, which is probably why the person who did this chose this particular area of the road. Maybe they had actually been to this area before, maybe in the warmer months, and they remembered it being woodsy and dense with brush. But it was nothing like that this time of year. By the time they got there, they probably wanted to get as far away from the body as possible, so they still left her there, because clearly this wasn't really a great area to hide anything. Now all this information only left detectives with more questions. The next day the medical examiner conducted the autopsy and was able to confirm the manner of death was homicide. But interestingly, and I think we would know that by the way, I'm just pointing that out, they have to put it on the report. It's like she didn't tie herself up and put herself in the suitcase. But interestingly, even though she had head trauma to her face, the back of her head, and the front of her head, the official cause of death was homicidal asphyxia, which we actually do not hear very often. This is not the strangulation type of asphyxia. This is something that I actually have not covered before, but coincidentally, it has been in the news recently in the Sarah Boone case. She allegedly zipped up her boyfriend in a suitcase and left him there to die, and he was confined to a very small space over time and could not breathe. Asphyxia itself, as most of you know, occurs when the body doesn't receive enough oxygen. But forensically speaking, there are actually three types: strangulation, chemical asphyxiation, and suffocation. This one falls into the last category, suffocation due to homicidal intent to cause death. Someone placed her inside the suitcase when she was still alive, bound and gagged without the ability to breathe. Over time, she slowly suffocated to death. There was an increased likelihood, due to the head trauma, that the victim may have been unconscious before being placed inside the suitcase. We won't ever know if she regained enough consciousness to be aware of what was going on and that she was dying in a very terrible way. It's heartbreaking, and it does show the extreme sense of cruelty that suitcase became her coffin. As far as her identity was concerned, it was known at the time that there was a missing woman in New York who matched the description of this victim. So Valerie's parents were notified on Wednesday evening, February 6th, that a body had been found, at which point her father and her older brother went down to the morgue, and they sadly made a positive identification of the body. It was 24-year-old Valerie Reyes. As you can probably imagine, this was devastating news, especially after Valerie had confided in her mother that she thought someone was going to murder her. It seemed like quite the premonition, unless someone had been threatening her life. That's what detectives wanted to find out next. Was there anyone close to Valerie who may have had issues with her who would want to harm her? The medical examiner did notice what appeared to be some skin underneath Valerie's fingernails, so clippings were taken to be analyzed. They also took swabs of her private areas and her chest to be tested for the presence of male DNA, but this could take weeks, if not months, to get results back. As word spread of the positive identification, the TIC community of New Rochelle was gripped by grief. Friends, family, and neighbors that had known Valerie as gentle, kind, and an artistic soul made her death even more tragic. Social media quickly filled with heartfelt tributes, photos, and memories shared by those who loved her. They remembered her bright smile, her love for books, and her genuine kindness that touched everyone that she met. Her father wrote on Facebook that a vigil would be held the next evening, on Thursday, February 7th at 5 p.m. at Glen Island Park in New Rochelle. He said, "At this unimaginably difficult time, we're asking for love, support, and respect for our family, for the loss of my beautiful daughter, Valerie Reyes, who is now resting in heaven." On Thursday, Norma went public to discuss her daughter and the fears that she shared with her. It seemed like Valerie truly had a genuinely bad feeling that something was going to happen to her, a feeling she could not shake. So was this more of a premonition than anything else? Some of you may not believe that can even happen. Some call it being psychic, others believe it's God. But gut feelings can be a real thing. Even though Norma was still wondering if anyone had threatened her daughter or did anything to make her feel uneasy, there wasn't any proof of that yet. So now, it just seemed like a very weird coincidence. Or maybe she was just very in tune to the vibes around her and was really able to pinpoint that something bad was going to happen. But there's more. They might think that she's just a runaway, that she's just, going into bad things or whatever. Norma wanted the public to know that Valerie wasn't a runaway. She wasn't into drugs, partying, or even going out late and getting into trouble. That was not her at all. She didn't like going to clubs. So, all of this just left Norma with more questions. Now that same night, Valerie's family held a vigil in Glen Island Park in New Rochelle. It was a cold, damp night, but that did not stop people from showing up and showing their support. A few hundred people, including dozens of Valerie's friends and close family members, huddled tightly together. Many of them were holding white candles, singing and praying in Spanish. A lot of people were crying. The gathering took place beneath the park's old German-style castle. There were women holding rosary beads beside circles of candles adorned with images of Mary or Jesus. Norma gave a very moving speech directed at the unknown person who had treated her daughter so cruelly. She said, "My daughter did not deserve whatever you did to her. My daughter was pure. My daughter was a good soul. You will be caught, sooner or later. You will get caught. I know it, I know it." She added that Valerie was amazing, and she wasn't just saying that because she was her mother. She said Valerie was a beautiful soul, a beautiful daughter, a beautiful sister, and amazing in so many ways. Then she told Valerie that she loved her. Valerie's best friend, Jeff, pulled out a keychain in the shape of a sandal from his pocket. It had the name Valerie inscribed on it. He told the media that he had bought it for her while he was on vacation in Mexico, but he never got the chance to give it to her. So now he planned on keeping it on his keys to remember her. As the vigil came to a close, they heard people shouting, "A la niña." The girl, spreading through the crowd, meaning the girl. Another man cried out, "Justice for Valerie." Within just a few days, a GoFundMe page was set up by a friend to help the family pay for funeral expenses, and it raised nearly $3,000 in just 3 hours. But soon, the case would take an unexpected turn. Remember those road workers who went out there and stumbled upon her body? Well, that foreman, James Clifford, when he had been called out there by his employee, became the subject of an investigation because this man took photos of the crime scene on his phone, including an image of Valerie, still bound with a visible head wound. It's pretty rude, disrespectful, and disgusting, in my opinion, and a lot of people shared the same sentiment, because then he took it upon himself to share these photos with other people. Now, sharing these photos was a clear violation of privacy, not only for Valerie, but also for the integrity of the entire investigation. The last thing her grieving family needed was to see these gruesome images of Valerie circulating among Clifford's acquaintances. Unfortunately, one of the people Clifford showed the photo to was a business owner from Connecticut, and it's so sad for me to think about this because it's all money-based. He chose to share them with a media outlet, and when he did, he had to reveal where he got them from. That is how James Clifford was investigated. He didn't face any criminal charges, which I was pretty surprised about. Instead, he received a very minor disciplinary action, including a brief suspension. He was placed on paid administrative leave for like 5 days, and he was demoted as foreman for 6 months. And then he lost 5 vacation days and had to do a mandatory sensitivity training. But he claimed it was just an error in judgment. His attorney, Lindy Oro, who was representing him, said that taking that photo was not with any ill intent. She said it was actually the actions of a traumatized person who was stunned by what they encountered. She said he was actually devastated by what he found, and it was an obvious error in judgment to take a picture of it, but she argued that he certainly didn't have any ill will or bad intention. But I have to say, I do understand being shocked about something happening, but I also think you have time to cool down, think about what you're doing, and yet you're still sharing these photos with other people. So, I don't really buy that. The public was outraged, and Greenwich First Selectman Peter Tess had to make a public apology on behalf of the county. He said Valerie was a daughter, a sister, and a cousin of a family who's suffering a tremendous loss at this time. The thoughtless and insensitive behavior by this employee was inexcusable. He extended his heartfelt condolences to her family. Now, there were many reactions throughout the community once Valerie's body had been found. Lucy Nolan, the Director of Policy and Public Relations at the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence, made a very bold statement to the news stations, explaining that the nature and way in which her body was found displayed an extreme example of the objectification of women. She said, "It's disgusting. As women, we've always been taught, and some men believe, that our bodies are for their gratification. Women are taught our whole lives that we have to look over our shoulders, have to be careful." Now, even though at this point in the investigation there was no evidence to suggest that this was domestic in nature, the article included this statement, correlating the way Valerie was found to the assumption that it was either a partner or a man who had forced himself on her and then discarded her afterward. Since 2000, there have been about 14 deaths related to domestic altercations per year in Connecticut. But remember Valerie's neighbor, Brenda? Well, she had noticed that Valerie wasn't around for a couple of mornings, but she just figured that she went on vacation again until she saw a Facebook post. It was on February 1st, and it had the missing persons poster posted. And when she saw that, she just started crying. Still, she was holding out hope that Valerie would be found safe. But then, when she learned of the discovery of the body, she could not believe it. She said, "It's disgusting, especially since the person who did this to her is still out there." Then, she commented about the road worker who took those pictures of her body, saying, "This is not a joke, it's someone's life." She explained how her children are horrified by the news. It's the first time something like that had happened so close to home. She said she feels like her children are now prisoners because she doesn't know where the murder took place. She doesn't even feel safe letting the kids out in their own front yard. Clearly, Valerie was so well liked and would be missed by so many people. The community wanted answers. So back to the investigation. Remember the private investigator initially hired by Valerie's family? Well, he had done some preliminary research into her bank statements, specifically related to her most recent transactions. New Rochelle and Greenwich detectives took over that part of the investigation, and her bank card became their main focus going forward. Since the last time she spoke to anyone was the night of Monday, January 28th, the investigators began looking at any transactions after that time. It turned out her debit card had been used at 5 Amman, January 29th, at a Chase Bank ATM close to her apartment in New Rochelle. It was only a 5-minute drive away, and $1,000 was withdrawn. The investigators pulled footage from a poll camera located in the bank area and did not see Valerie. Instead, they watched as a black Honda CR-V pulled up, parked across the street in a neighboring parking lot, and a person, appearing to be a man dressed in dark-colored clothing, exited the vehicle, crossed the street, and entered the bank vestibule outside, where the ATM was located. He looked like he was wearing a black hooded sweatshirt over his head, dark pants, and a pair of black sneakers with white soles. After a couple of minutes, he exited the ATM area, got back into the Honda, and drove westbound. This was their big break, their first significant lead in the case. Clearly, this man was in possession of Valerie's bank card, They began searching other cameras in the area for any additional sightings of the same black Honda CR-V. They also searched license plate readers and found a black CR-V license plate that was captured 2 minutes away, located at the intersection of North Avenue and Lincoln Avenue in New Rochelle. They ran this license plate number, which matched a 2017 black Honda CR-V registered to a company out of Flushing, Queens, New York, about a 20-minute drive away from Valerie's apartment. As they continued searching through bank records, they saw that another $1,000 withdrawal occurred on January 30th, the same day that Valerie had been reported missing. This time, the transaction was at an ATM in Midtown Manhattan. The following day, January 31st, a third withdrawal was made in Manhattan, followed by 2 more on February 1st and February 2nd. In total, $5,350 was taken out of Val's account from the time she disappeared until days before her body was found. On February 9th, detectives reached out to the company that had registered the car. It was a car-sharing company that lent vehicles to the public through an app on their phone. Once a user signed up and provided proof of a valid driver's license, they could pick up a car from the company's parking lots throughout the city without speaking to anyone. These cars were available 24/7. Let me circle back to the car because I want to tell you something else before I go into those details. Since there were 2 different states involved in this case, the FBI assisted with the investigation. They had returned to Valerie's apartment, trying to find anything of evidentiary value. Now it seemed clear that a struggle had occurred there. Despite the absence of substantial blood evidence, there were traces in at least 3 locations, 2 in her bedroom and 1 in the bathroom. It appeared that somehow the perpetrator had gained entry into her basement unit and that something had happened in Valerie's bedroom, perhaps on her bed. Afterward, the killer may have cleaned up in the bathroom. They collected various items, including some of Valerie's sketches of different people, hoping to identify and rule out everyone, especially any men she had drawn portraits of. This would suggest that the person had been to her apartment, perhaps sitting as she sketched them, and detectives wanted to rule everyone out. It was like having composite sketches of several different people right there in her apartment. They used Valerie's social media accounts to match most of the portraits to pictures of people on her friends list, but one portrait of a man couldn't be matched to anyone Valerie was following at the time. This piece of evidence, along with the car connection, was uncovered at the same time. The rental car company provided detectives with the name of the individual who had picked up the black Honda CR-V on January 28th and returned it on the 29th, within the time frame when Valerie had disappeared. His name was Javier Enrique da Silva Rojas. His driver's license information, including his address at an apartment building in Flushing, close to the rental car lot, was given to detectives. They pulled CCTV footage from the building and reviewed January 28th, spotting Javier on camera at 10:50 p.m., wearing a black hooded sweatshirt, black pants, and black sneakers with white soles, the same attire seen on bank footage showing someone using Valerie's debit card. Additional footage from the car-sharing lot showed the same man retrieving the black Honda CR-V at 10:55 p.m., just a short walk from his apartment. Later footage from his building showed Javier returning the next morning at 9:43 a.m., wearing a different outfit, a long coat, and carrying a duffel bag. He returned to the building and left minutes later without the duffel bag in hand. When the detectives compared Javier's face to the sketch from Valerie's apartment, it matched. It looked similar. So they pulled up Javier's Instagram account and started going through all of his photos, and it was an exact match to his profile picture. However, he wasn't someone that Valerie was following at the time of her death. There was, however, a photo that appeared to be of Javier and Valerie together in February of 2018, which he posted to his Instagram. But how were they connected? This photo looks like a selfie of both of them. They're in what looks to be a CVS pharmacy location, in one of the aisles, and it looks like they're together, friendly, at least friends. I don't know if anything more comes from this picture, but here is a really good picture of Valerie. Well, here's some background information on Javier D. Silva. Just like Valerie, he was 24 years old at the time, And while there weren't many details about the information on his background, he held dual citizenship in both Portugal, where he was born, and Venezuela, where he was raised in a middle-class family in a suburban area. He grew up in Caracas, which is the Venezuelan capital, and Javier studied journalism in college at a university in Santa Rosa. While growing up, he regularly traveled with his family to the United States, but in 2017, he decided to extend one of those visits. He entered the United States on May 8 of 2017 through a visa waiver program that allows people from certain countries to travel to the U.S. for business or tourism for up to 90 days without obtaining a visa. However, when his allowed time expired on August 5 of 2017, Javier chose not to leave, so he had been living in the country illegally from that time until the present. He told his friends he never wanted to return to his homeland because it was being run by an autocratic socialist dictator, his words at the time. When Javier came to the U.S., Venezuela was facing severe political and economic instability. The country's economy was collapsing, there were shortages of food and essentials, and there were protests happening in the streets all the time. So, Javier wanted to escape this entire situation. When he got to the U.S., he settled in Flushing, New York, where he initially worked some odd jobs, finding work at a cleaning company, and eventually switching to working as a barista at a local coffee shop. He loved traveling, enjoyed nature, and was passionate about photography. When he wasn't working, he traveled widely across the United States, posting photos of his visits to New York City, Washington, D.C., and other places to his Instagram account, which did have several thousand followers. In these photos, Javier has long hair. He's got that cropped beard. He kind of looks like the typical urban hipster. And over the years, it appeared from his social media presence that he had several girlfriends, but none of them appeared to be that serious, because they would be switched out for the next one. People that were close to him knew him as kind and thoughtful, and one of his friends, who went to college with him before he dropped out to move to America, said that he even tried to get her cancer treatments out in the U.S. When detectives did run a background check, Javier did not have a criminal record, so they wondered if he had obtained her debit card somehow, but had not been involved in her murder, or if he was the killer they were looking for. Detectives didn't think this was a coincidence. On February 8th, Javier shared a picture on social media showing off a new Apple laptop and computer monitor. They knew that it appeared that he had been the person in possession of Valerie's debit card. So, they wondered how he got those new things, but there had been other suspiciously similar withdrawals from the same account, starting back in September of the year before, in 2018. So, detectives needed to know more. They asked Valerie's family and friends if the name Javier sounded familiar, and sure enough, a friend of hers told detectives that Valerie had met Javier on a dating site and had briefly had a romantic relationship with him, maybe for 3 months, back in 2018. But interestingly, later in September, a few months after the breakup, this friend explained, Javier texted Valerie out of the blue with an apology because he said he mistakenly used her debit card information that he had obtained when they were together to withdraw funds from her account. He felt bad about it and wanted to reimburse her. Valerie then texted a friend and told them to handle the situation because she was not interested in communicating with him. Clearly, this dude sounds a little sneaky. He's a thief, of course, so it's no wonder Valerie seemed to have had enough with him and wanted her friend to correspond and get the reimbursement. She specifically texted this quote, "I don't want to talk to him at all or have anything to do with him." End quote. How do you mistakenly use someone's debit card information that you clearly had to either take a picture of or write down? You had to have a record of it somehow. But one thing detectives know is that the deceptive banking behavior is not something new, but Javier having possession of the actual card was something new and did seem to start the night in question. She wouldn't have willingly given this card to him. Norma let detectives know she didn't know Javier that well, but she wasn't a big fan of him. She explained that when he and Valerie met on a dating site at the end of 2017, by January 2018, they had officially started dating. She only met him once or twice, so most of what she knew about him she heard from her daughter. But she remembered him being very persistent when it came to asking Valerie to become his girlfriend. She also recalled him being a fan of horror movies, and he seemed much more interested in Valerie than she was in him. At first, things were in the honeymoon phase, and the couple even briefly discussed possibly living together in Valerie's apartment. But ultimately, she decided to end the relationship in April of 2018, so just about 3 months after they got together. She began seeing this manipulative side, this controlling side, to him and told him she needed a hiatus. He was very stubborn. He wouldn't take no for an answer. When Valerie initially tried to talk to him before the breakup, when it came to their differences, he was way more interested in them being more serious in a relationship than Valerie was, and it got too much for her. Norma actually referred to it as a tumultuous relationship, especially when he revealed his deceitful nature. When Valerie told him it wasn't going to work out, he guilt-tripped her by lying about his mom having cancer back in Venezuela. Because he was in the country illegally, he couldn't travel home to go see her, so he was trying to make her feel bad for him so that she wouldn't leave him. And we've seen this in other cases. He wanted to continue the relationship, and Valerie was a kind soul. She felt deeply empathetic toward him in a situation, and she couldn't bring herself to just leave him and break it off. But a few weeks later, nothing had improved in the relationship, and Valerie decided to end it for good in the beginning of April. Norma said they found out that his mom was not dying of cancer, and that really raised even more red flags. Valerie realized she needed to distance herself from him, but Norma said that he wouldn't stop contacting Valerie. He tried texting her and calling her after they broke up. He sent her a birthday text on April 4th and songs that were meant to express his feelings, but Valerie had no interest in keeping in contact with him, so she stopped responding and then blocked him on all social media platforms. He was apparently destroyed for a few months following the breakup. After that, they were no longer in regular contact at all. Their last known contact was September 13th of 2018, so about 5 months following the breakup. I briefly mentioned this. Javier texted Valerie, admitting that he accidentally used her debit card info and that he wanted to pay her back. She texted a guy friend that she didn't want to talk to him, didn't want to have anything to do with him, and asked if she could use her friend's account to accept the money that he wanted to send her. Following this exchange, Javier seemed to have finally figured out that Valerie was done and that no tactics were going to make her take him back. But all of this was more than 12 months earlier. So Norma wondered, what did Javier have to do with Valerie's murder? She had moved on since then, with Justin, and had been dating him for a while. Javier was old news. That's of course when they explained the debit card withdrawals that were happening since Valerie disappeared, and the man on the camera they were certain was Javier. Was he her killer? They didn't know yet, but after hearing what Norma told them, the detectives could see the classic patterns of a toxic relationship. Javier appeared to be someone desperate for control, and when he didn't get it, he could have become dangerous. From the beginning of their short relationship, Javier displayed what we know as love bombing. He overwhelmed Valerie with intense affection and attention that quickly escalated to a level of seriousness that she found uncomfortable. This tactic creates this false sense of closeness. This period of time can be very intense and make it harder for someone to recognize the underlying red flags. His refusal to accept the end of their relationship and his repeated attempts to stay in contact show his inability to let go and respect her boundaries. All of this added up, the moving too fast, the creating dependency through emotional manipulation, and using guilt to control his partner and make them overlook his flaws and his behavior. Now, these signs can be subtle at first, but they often lead to more obvious forms of control. In Valerie's case, they signaled to her that Javier had the potential to escalate his behavior into more concerning actions when his manipulations stopped working. So Valerie did the right thing in this situation. She left before things got to a point of no return. She was able to get away, but the question was, did Javier truly move on, or had he been stewing all of these months? Especially when he found out that she was dating Justin, Was he planning the ultimate revenge by not letting anyone else ever have her, by taking her life? It was their biggest lead. He had a motive, and he still had her number. He knew where she lived. Could he have possibly convinced her to talk to him that night and let him inside? Investigators had a way to try to find out. They had enough evidence to get a warrant for his arrest on larceny charges for the illegal use of her debit card, and a search warrant for his apartment and the vehicle he rented. They also got his cell phone data, and on February 11th, officers from both the New Rel and Greenwich Police Department actually arrested Javier, and he was detained as they carried out their searches. While that was going on, they brought him in for an interview, but he denied having anything to do with Valerie's murder and acted as though he didn't even know who she was. When confronted with the video evidence of him leaving his residence, renting the Honda, and being spotted on camera withdrawing money from the ATM, Javier said that he found Valerie's debit card on the sidewalk when he was bar shopping in the East Village in Manhattan. But when investigators asked, "Well, how did you get the PIN?" he said, "Oh, I actually found her wallet on the sidewalk, and inside was a piece of paper with the PIN number written on it." I'm sorry, but who really expects that to be the truth? Who would even do that? It was an unbelievable scenario, and it was one after the next. In a search of his apartment, they found not only Valerie's driver's license but her bank card inside Javier's wallet. He also had her Kindle device and one of the pillows from her bed. Soon, they wouldn't need to listen to his lies because they had more evidence. They got his DNA and his GPS data, his phone extraction, in addition to Valerie's service provider's download, because they couldn't find her phone. This would show everything he did on his phone and everywhere he went, and what Valerie's phone was doing at the exact same time. First, they found that text from Valerie to her friend back in September 2018, saying she wanted nothing to do with Javier. From that moment on, there was no direct contact via phone between Javier and Valerie. But on January 24th, just days before she went missing, the same day she broke things off with Justin, Javier sent a very strange text to a woman he had been dating at the time. Now, I could not quite piece together what he was trying to convey in this text. The text was this: "I just found my ex effing in my bed with the guy next door in New Rel on December after years, but I didn't want to tell you." I don't know if it's the language barrier. I know his first language is Spanish, and maybe they translated this. I'm not sure, but he's mentioning an ex in reference to New Rel. And that's where Valerie lived. So detectives just assumed and pieced together that he was referring to Valerie. What he's essentially saying, I think, in this text, is that he somehow witnessed, I'm guessing his ex, which would be Valerie, having intercourse with her next-door neighbor. Since he used to live or be around that apartment, it seemed like he kind of considered it his. I don't know. That's how I interpreted it. I could be wrong. I didn't really understand, like on December after years, because it hadn't been years. They weren't together for years. Detectives assumed he was telling his new love interest that his ex had cheated on him in December and that he caught her. But we know that's not true. They weren't together, and they didn't date for years, so it's a little bit confusing. Most likely, this was just to garner sympathy from this new girl in his life. He had done the same thing with Valerie in the past, making her feel sorry for him. But 4 days later, on the exact night that Valerie told her mom and Jeffrey that she was scared someone was going to murder her, Javier left his apartment at 10:50 p.m., rented the Honda, and then input an address for a church in New Rel into Google Maps. Now we're getting this from his phone extraction, just so you know. Now that church is only 1 mile away from Valerie's apartment. Google location data showed Javier then traveled to New Rel a few minutes after midnight. Now, we're into January 29th. His GPS showed that he was within 200 feet of Valerie's apartment, at which point Javier decided to deliberately turn off the location services on his phone, which means he was not tracking his location anymore. However, the theory that Valerie knew he was there or that somehow they connected and she willingly let him in was debunked because there was no record of any contact made between these two devices prior to or after his arrival to New Rel. She had no idea that he was there. She wasn't expecting him, and he most likely broke into her apartment. Since he'd been there before, he knew an easy way inside. How was unclear, but what was apparent is that a violent struggle ensued in her bedroom at approximately 3 a.m. Now, 3 hours after Javier turned off his location data, his phone stopped pinging off cell towers, indicating that he had placed his phone in airplane mode. Isn't that interesting? Then this is disgusting. He used Valerie's thumbprint to unlock her phone. She was most likely unconscious at this time, and then he accessed her iCloud account. He viewed her Notes app, her photos. He went through her browsing history and the Find My iPhone app, so like all the places she had been, what she had been doing, and he did this until 4:17 a.m. So he is just sitting there going through her stuff for over an hour. At 4:20 a.m. and again at 4:33, Javier used Valerie's thumbprint again on her phone to access her Chase Bank application, and then he checked her bank account balance. At some point, he placed tape over Valerie's mouth, tied her up, and then put her inside a suitcase while she was still alive, and then placed that suitcase in the back of his vehicle. Just a half hour after he accessed her bank account from her phone, he went to the bank and was caught on camera withdrawing that $1,000 and driving westbound. Then, his phone location data was turned back on, and his phone pinged in Harrison, New York, at 6:29 a.m., then Darien, Connecticut, at 6:34 a.m., and then at approximately 7:11 a.m., Javier was once again accessing several different apps on Valerie's phone. By 7:24, his phone pinged on a cell tower in Greenwich, Connecticut, which is where Valerie's body was found. By 8:06, Javier's phone was traveling back the way he came. It pinged in Scarsdale, New York, New Rel at 8:27 a.m., and Queens, where he lived, at 9:11 a.m. Then, once again, he turned off his location services as he got closer to his own apartment, but CCTV footage showed him entering the building at 9:43 a.m., wearing that tan coat and carrying a duffel bag, and then exiting minutes later without it. Over the course of the next few days, he made a number of withdrawals that I briefly mentioned, totaling $5,350. On February 6th, the day after Valerie's body was found, Javier rented the same Honda CR-V in the early morning hours, and his phone GPS showed him going to a car wash in the Bronx. Then, he returned the vehicle to the rental company, clearly attempting to get rid of any evidence that Valerie had been inside that vehicle. The next day, on February 7th, this man callously logged into an online marketplace and traded Valerie's iPad for an Apple monitor and an Apple laptop, which he later told his roommate he found. He is so lucky that he finds wallets. He finds expensive electronics just lying around. Who needs to work when you have such good luck? Especially with the post that he made the next day, on February 8th, posing with his newly acquired technology, knowing that he killed for it. Was it worth it to trade a human life for material possessions? Days later, he's sitting in the interview room, lying through his teeth when they have enough evidence to prove he is responsible. When confronted with even more evidence, Javier still denied ever being in New Rochelle or Connecticut, but now he admitted that he did date Valerie. However, he hadn't seen her since the beginning of 2018. He claimed that everything was good in their relationship and it ended on good terms, even adding that it was so weird that his favorite thing about her was that she smelled good. Yet, he couldn't remember how long they dated. He was like, we didn't have an anniversary, so that meant maybe they didn't date even 6 months, right? But when they showed him text messages and the phone data of him being in New Rochelle and driving to Connecticut, he admitted he rented the Honda on January 28th. But he drank a lot that night, and he blacked out. He didn't remember anything that happened. Finally, the detective showed him a picture of Valerie's deceased and partially decomposed body, and he began to break. In these pictures, she definitely didn't look the same way she had before he had done this to her when he threw her away like trash and left her to die. Now Javier was claiming he was with Valerie on the night of the 28th, and that her death was a complete accident, that it actually happened while the two were having intercourse. Of course, they want him to elaborate because they already knew this wasn't adding up. They knew she wanted nothing to do with him. They hadn't made any plans to meet up. They hadn't had contact in a long time. She wouldn't have let him inside willingly on a night that she had a terrible gut feeling. She was terrified she was going to be murdered. But they let him tell his version of what happened, and when asked how she died, he replied, "She fell. We fell together." When detectives asked if Valerie fell off the bed, he nodded and explained she fell on the floor, cracked her head open while they were getting a little rough while hooking up. He said he tried to help her, but she wasn't responding. At that point in the interview, he began to cry. He was shaking. He was shaking so hard he was having trouble speaking. But he told them that he put his mouth on her mouth. He tried to put air in it, and then when asked if Valerie was bleeding, Javier could only whimper. That's when he said, "I'm a bad person. I did something wrong. I didn't call the police because I thought they would blame me." So instead, you're telling me that instead of just calling 911, he taped her mouth so she couldn't scream or breathe, and then tied her up? According to him, when they asked why he did that, she wouldn't fit inside the suitcase. But he did admit that he drove, he didn't know where he was going, and after he got rid of her body, he went back to his apartment and waited, acting as though he knew that he was eventually going to get caught. Really, the fact that he was in Valerie's apartment for at least 3 hours means he probably attempted to clean up. That's probably why there was only a small amount of blood found. So, it seemed more like he was trying to get away with it. He nodded yes when asked if he knew that cops would find him. He even claimed that the reason he withdrew the cash from Valerie's account was because he wanted to get caught. Of course, the investigators did not believe the story. I mean, there was way too much premeditation for this to have been an accident. But let's say that it was. Let's say he was only there to steal her bank card. See, if the death was an accident, why not just call 911 to help this young woman who was still alive? But he put her inside of a suitcase. She would have most likely survived the head trauma. She died from suffocation. At this point, he was being charged with a federal crime of kidnapping resulting in death, a charge that carried the death penalty. This was because the federal government had jurisdiction. He kidnapped Valerie in one state and then crossed state lines, and she died in another. On February 12th, the same day that Javier was arrested, Valerie's funeral was taking place. It was at St. Gabriel's Church, while the captain was holding a press conference. I will narrate it to you as follows. Ever since Valerie Reyes was found deceased in Greenwich on February 5th, Greenwich police have been working closely with police from New Rochelle, New York. Several crime scenes have been examined, hours of surveillance video have been reviewed, and numerous interviews conducted. Detectives from both agencies have pursued a multitude of leads. There's been an intense focus on the use of Valerie's ATM card, after which we believe she was murdered. This line of investigation, corroborated by others, led us to a suspect last night in Queens, New York. Detectives from New Rochelle, accompanied by detectives from the Greenwich Police Department, located and arrested a suspect in the fraudulent use of Valerie's ATM card. This same suspect was interviewed jointly by Greenwich and New Rochelle detectives and admitted a role in the death of Valerie Reyes. The suspect, who has already been identified by New Rochelle police, is Javier da Silva of Queens, New York. At this point, Mr. D is the only one that's been identified as a suspect, but I want to emphasize that the investigation continues. The investigation is not finished yet. There are a lot of loose ends that need to be tied up. During the interview, he agreed to be interviewed, and I would characterize the essence as cooperative. Again, we just want to emphasize that we hope this obtains some level of justice. Back at the church, mourners came out to pay tribute to a life lost way too soon. In the hallway of the chapel, a video collage of Valerie's life played on repeat, capturing moments from her childhood, her singing, performing in a family play, sitting on the edge of a mountain in Colorado, and dancing with friends. The video also showed her playful side, featuring clips with humorous Snapchat filters and photos showcasing what her mother lovingly called her fashionista hairstyles. Her younger brothers, who are only 5 and 7 years old, were crying as they watched that video. Valerie's best friend, Jeff and Ricky Medina, did their best to comfort the heartbroken boys. Valerie was buried at Greenwood Union Cemetery, and her loved ones, including her mom and her older brother, huddled together, just crying and embracing as her casket was lowered into the ground. Her friend Andrea actually made a public statement about the person Valerie was. She was so alive. She would do a lot of things for the community. She was so sweet, and everyone remembers her as a very kind-hearted young lady. Her grandpa also said a few words as well. "We can't stand the pain, but we have to go on," says Reyes' grandfather. Days after being charged, Javier was already doing interviews with different news agencies, claiming that this was all a very unfortunate accident and that he was so spooked he ran and didn't call the police. He would sob, and he would act like he was so remorseful during these interviews, acting like he wished he would have done more to save Valerie, when it's so beyond clear that this was all on purpose. Let's be real. This man rented a car, turned his GPS off on his phone, and caught Valerie off guard because they had no plans to meet. She wanted nothing to do with him. He had already stolen from her in the past. So whether he went there with the intent to murder her or not, or just solely to steal, an altercation occurred because of it, and it ended in her death. Therefore, it makes no difference. His actions were intentional. When the DNA results came back, it proved that he also forced himself on her. Yep, so the plot thickens. His DNA was found on a vaginal swab, a swab of her chest, and underneath her fingernails. She fought back, indicating that this was not consensual at all. His DNA was also found on the handle of the suitcase. But I also want to mention this. When he was interviewed, he had a bruise under his left eye that was healing. She hit him. We know that she hit him. So she was fighting him. 4 days before this, he sent a text about being upset that his ex was sleeping with somebody else. How would he have known that? Because he was probably stalking her. This case started to appear to be about Javier taking what he wanted, Valerie's body on his terms, and her money. Whether he intended to kill her that night, or a struggle ensued as he tried to force himself and she resisted, she was dead because of him. He was only upset that he got caught. I can tell you that in total, he stole more than $10,000 from her bank account from September 2018 and the days following her death. When her ex-boyfriend, Justin Ort, heard about Javier being arrested, he said that it came as a huge surprise. He said Valerie did not speak of Javier recently, and she never said she was afraid of him either. Justin also mentioned he didn't know Javier was even in New York anymore. He thought he had moved to California. They came here to actually tell us that they have someone in custody, and then they released his name. My heart dropped. It's like emotions of so much anger and hate, but relieved, just thankful. Just thanking my daughter. I would ask her, I would pray to her every single night to guide them, to lead them to any evidence that might lead to his whereabouts. I know a lot of people are going to be relieved knowing that there's this monster, that they caught him already, that they made an arrest on the same day as your daughter's wake. What does that mean to you exactly? It means a lot. It means a lot. You know, it's different when your child dies of natural diseases, but when somebody, a monster, comes and takes your daughter away, or your child away, for what? For what? You know, it's not only hurt, it's hate. So I feel relieved because they have him, but of course we're still obviously devastated. This case took quite a while to reach trial, mostly because it had to be handled in a federal court since the crime spanned 2 states. Additionally, a lot of the delay was due to Javier's defense team. They were repeatedly attempting to negotiate a plea deal. They wanted to remove the death penalty as an option. His public defenders, Mark DeMarco and Jason Schur, worked to reduce Javier's potential sentence by trying to portray him as a good person with no prior criminal history and a positive reputation among those who knew him. Really, they did this by emphasizing that he had been forced to leave college and flee Venezuela with only $600 in cash, seeking a new life in the US. While here, his defense said that he kept a low profile, working hard and being a law-abiding citizen. But I have to say, are we calling it a low profile? Is that what you want to call it? He was actually here illegally, and that's why he was laying low. But anyway, a year later, on the 5th of February, 2020, Javier appeared in court for the very first time. This date was exactly 1 year after Valerie's body had been found on the side of the road, and Javier looked very different from the man who had been taken into custody a year earlier. His hair was neatly cut, his beard was shaved. It gave him more of a clean-cut appearance, which is not uncommon when you're dealing with someone this nasty and evil, because you want to make them look nice, not disheveled or anything. He accepted a plea agreement, which required him to plead guilty to the charges against him in exchange for the removal of the death penalty. In a statement provided to the court, Javier said in Spanish, "After a violent struggle in her apartment, while Valerie Reyes was still alive, I bound her feet and hands, put tape over her mouth, and put her in a suitcase." 3 months later, he appeared in court for his sentencing hearing. Now this part of the proceeding is where the defense team can plead for leniency, and friends and family of the victim can share their impact statements. Then it's kind of balanced and weighed by a judge, and they decide what the sentence is going to be. Although his attorneys didn't try to diminish the seriousness of the crime, they attempted to argue that his violent actions were a result of, wait for it, intense stress, compounded by such a long time being separated from his family and his drug habit. He was habitually using marijuana. Last time I checked though, I'm just saying, I don't think marijuana is usually related to violence per se. I usually think it makes people more calm. They also just described him as a broken man that was sincerely regretful for his actions and fully aware of the horrific nature of what he had done. When it was Valerie's mom, Norma's turn to address the court, she spoke to Javier directly, saying that he was selfish, greedy, and a soulless person. She said, "You, Javier, deserve nothing but pain and rejection. A mother can never prepare to face a terrible day like this. I want you to hear the words of a mother who is devastated by taking away my baby girl. My boys are all heartbroken and devastated. My boys struggle to accept she's no longer here. Today, I hope Valerie finds the justice she deserves." Javier was also given the opportunity to provide a statement, and I was surprised he did. He said, "No words can express how repulsed I am by the acts I committed. My acts caused Valerie's death, and I can never forgive myself for doing that. It's my fault that she's not here any longer. Valerie's family deserves to know I'm sorry. I implore before God on my knees that God will bless them and remove some of their pain." The federal court judge, Vincent Bashidi, called it a brutal, callous, cruel crime, and he didn't buy the defense's claims that Javier was a good person who just did one bad thing. I mean, this is a very big bad thing to be just like one bad thing you did. He didn't believe that he was remorseful, and it didn't excuse his actions. Nonetheless, he didn't deserve a lighter sentence. The judge said that what you did to this woman was sickening. Anyone who could do such a thing is not a good person by definition. Anyone who could do such a thing like this is an evil person, and justice required an evil deed to be punished by a lengthy prison sentence. He also highlighted Javier's actions after the murder and how he stole from her bank account. Still, he sold her iPad for money, and he also made sure to mention that Javier's family could visit him in prison if he wanted them to. But Valerie's family would never get to see her again. So ultimately, he sentenced Javier to 30 years in prison, plus 2 years of supervision. He would be 55 years old upon release, which I think is not enough time. But immigration officials said that as soon as that man served his sentence, he would be deported. We've never gotten an answer as to what made Valerie so scared for her life in the days before her death. No threats were found on her phone or within any of her personal belongings, and if there were, they've never been reported. So, did Javier threaten her, or is there a more mysterious explanation for her fears? Valerie was known as a deeply intuitive person, someone who often trusted her gut feelings. So did she sense that danger was near, maybe picking up on subtle cues that others may have missed? Was this a chilling premonition or a lingering sense of dread from a recent encounter? We'll likely never know the answer. Either way, this is yet another case where a woman's life has been stolen for a man's pleasure, whether that's the physical part or the material possessions that he stood to gain.